you will do anything. It's no longer what you become. It's what opportunities your children will have. It's not a place government should dictate. This nationalized, Washington-centered education will take away parents' choice of local control for parents across the country instead of supporting and empowering. Mr. Speaker, remember when I talked about Terry McAuliffe, of what he said. This takes it a giant leap further by putting the federal government in full control of every education. I'm not sure if that's what the chairman of Ways and Means was meaning, why we should build up more bureaucracy, but it seems to fit in this bill. That alone is reason enough to defeat the bill. Mr. Speaker, from bank surveillance to bailouts, this bill takes the problems President Biden and Democrats have already created and makes them much, much worse. It's no secret that this bill is too extreme, too costly, and too liberal for the United States. My colleagues here in the House and in the Senate know it. And staunch liberals in the press know it as well. Just a few weeks ago, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger said, "Nobody elected Joe Biden to be FDR." This even spends more than FDR. Why he was fighting a world war. Senator Manchin echoed that sentiment. This is not a center-left or a left country. We are a center, if anything, a little center-right. That being shown, and we ought to be able to recognize that. The New York Times editorial board, they even went further. I'm not a big fan of the New York Times. You know, I read a headline yesterday. Mr. Speaker, you know what it said? It was talking about your party. It said after the last Tuesday election, Democrats should not panic. Don't panic. Because they think it's already over. This bill is going to seal the deal. The New York Times, in a blistering editorial, said, "The Democratic Party has become distracted from crucial issues like the economy, inflation, ending the coronavirus pandemic, and restoring normalcy in schools." That's a quote, Mr. Speaker. That's the New York Times. The Times went on to describe this bill not as a solution, but as part of a sharp leftward push in the party, which, as they point out, most Americans don't want nor need. But despite these overwhelming warnings from moderates in their party, from liberals in the press, and from the American people at the polls, House Democrats are plugging their ears. Mr. Speaker, even if somebody looks at them and tells them what's in the bill, they want you to look away. Why? Why wouldn't they be proud of it? The Democrats aren't just ignoring what's going on, it's worse. They aren't even pretending to listen. Don't take my word for it. Listen to what a member of your own party, Congresswoman Spanberger, said recently. "We're not willing to say, yeah, inflation is a problem, and supply chain is a problem, and we don't have enough workers in our workforce. We gloss over it." Clearly, the challenges Americans are waking up to every day are not concerns, Mr. Speaker, of the Democrats. And that is the fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans. House Democrats are focused on securing the Speaker's legacy. House Republicans are focused on solving the labor crisis. Mr. Speaker, House is not in order, Mr. Speaker. House is not in order, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Democrats are focused on mandates. House Republicans are focused on more freedom. House Democrats are focused on so-called equality. House Republicans are focused on quality education. House Democrats are focused on payoffs for illegal immigrants. House Republicans are focused on protecting the border. And House Democrats are focused on the Green New Deal. House Republicans are focused on lowering gas prices. When you look at those differences, it's no wonder the American people want new leadership. Mr. Speaker, the Democrats have no clue about the damage they've done to America with one party, with one rule, in 1 year. But if the Democrats won't listen to our fellow citizens, they'll have to listen here. Before I describe in greater detail the contents of this bill, let's take a step back and understand how we got into this mess. Mr. Speaker, we want to explain it to our children's children. When President Biden walked into the Oval Office on January 20th, 2021, he was handed every single ingredient he needed for unprecedented success.
Mr. Speaker, House not in order.
Gentlemen will suspend.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure, but I know Speaker Pelosi likes to remove people from committee if they don't reach to higher standards. I would be worried with the much interruptions that something may happen to somebody. So, Mr. Speaker, it's just, I'm worried for him. All President Biden had to do was nothing. Just think about where we would be today if he had done nothing. Our economy would be booming. Our supply chain would be intact. Our nation would be energy independent. Our children would be free from burdensome mandates. Our borders would be completely secure without those on the terrorist watch list coming across. Our dollar would be sound with no inflation. Our enemies would be on notice, not on the advance. But what happened instead? The last 10 months have been the most radical, the most extreme, and the most incompetent 10 months in American history. Mr. Speaker, it's one-party rule in 1 year that created all this. From their first day in office, the Biden administration has waged war on American workers, American values, American borders, American energy, and worst of all, American families. Mr. Speaker, I'll wait. We have never seen anything like this before. Biden terminated every successful immigration policy put into place by President Trump, triggering the largest wave of illegal immigration in of all history. Mr. Speaker, I know he put the vice president in charge. Biden shut down the production of American energy and closed down American pipelines, surrendering the energy independence that was achieved during the Trump administration. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you can remember back 10 months ago what the price of gas was, but I know every American can. When we were energy independent, it was a time when price was low. Today, the new Biden administration is making us reliant on foreign producers once again. He is literally begging OPEC to produce the energy that we could easily produce right here on our own shores. President Biden spent trillions of dollars on left-wing social engineering and printed money we did not have for projects we did not lead, leading to massive runaway inflation. Mr. Speaker, Larry Summers warned the nation about this in February. Mr. Speaker, in June or July, on a CNN town hall meeting, the President said he wasn't worried about inflation. Mr. Speaker, President Biden launched a campaign to dramatically raise taxes and regulations on our workers and manufacturers, destroying the amazing record of economic growth and job creation he inherited. Mr. Speaker, President Biden paid workers not to work and fired workers who were working because they wouldn't comply with his COVID mandates. These were the same people that were heroes a year before when we didn't have one-party rule. These were the same people who showed up to care for us and risked their lives. This supply chain crisis was dramatically worsened by the return to the failed tax, regulatory, trade, and foreign policies of the past. Mr. Speaker, and Biden used the FBI to target parents as domestic terrorists. Can you imagine that? To use your own FBI to go after parents, calling them domestic terrorists, without any evidence, simply in aiming to silence their First Amendment rights. A whistleblower just confirmed it. The President's rhetoric is dividing and inflaming us, rather than uniting us like he promised to do. And when his administration missteps, and it does often, Biden will blame the military, our allies, the Vice President, Congress, ordinary Americans, anyone but himself. That's not what leaders do. That's not what leaders do. Leaders take responsibility and then take action. As elected leaders, it's our job to take action that makes life better for all Americans. That's badly needed today, Mr. Speaker. But President Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress have failed at the basic duty. Let's look at how. President Biden has defaulted to a failed economic agenda of the past. This administration is plainly incompetent and is growing the government at the American people's expense. Americans are paying more for things they need today than they can afford. The latest CPI report is stunning news. Mr. Speaker, Consumer Price Index soared 6.2% in the last year under one-party rule in Washington, and almost 1% in October alone. It's the fastest pace in 30 years. You know what the common denominator is? One-party year, one-party rule for 1 year. Last week's inflation results undercut the idea that inflation is temporary or transitory. If you look under the hood, the numbers suggest that higher prices are not only being passed on to consumers, they're becoming the new normal. Even the politicians responsible for inflation now concede Americans will continue to live with it for at least another year. Make no mistake, inflation is becoming implanted in our economy. Too much money is chasing too few of goods. It all started with one-party rule from 1 year in Washington. You first started with $2 trillion, now it's $5 trillion. Americans are also witnessing shortages and supply chain problems too. Again, put politics aside and just look at the numbers. They're jaw-dropping. Americans are paying $20 or $30 more on groceries per week. Thanksgiving is coming, a time Americans gather together with family and friends. I'll guarantee you what they'll talk about around that table. This is the most expensive Thanksgiving they've ever had. I know those in Virginia and New Jersey. They realize what one-party rule in 1 year can do. Americans are paying more for gasoline, the highest price in 7 years. Mr. Speaker, that was the last time President Biden was down in the White House. To get to and from work, to drive their kids to school, or bring their elderly parents to a doctor's appointment. Americans are paying more for the materials their businesses need to operate, which means higher prices for consumers and less opportunity for wage increases. Inflation is a tax on all Americans. Inflation is robbing families of the future they deserve. Mr. Speaker, when Majority Leader Stinney mentioned this date and what our children's children will learn, they'll probably be the first generation in 30 years to learn about where inflation came back. It was one-party rule in 1 year. Americans are bracing for higher costs to come. They realize our economic future is grim under President Biden. I can wait, Mr. Speaker. The Biden administration has proven themselves untrustworthy when it comes to handling the economy. He pursues counterproductive policies and does not keep the promises he makes. As a candidate, President Biden pledged nobody making under $400,000 will have their taxes raised. Period. Bingo. Mr. Speaker, then on the eve of the election, he promised those making less than $400,000 wouldn't pay a penny more. And Mr. Speaker, and as president, he said, I give you my word, if you make under $400,000 a year, I'll never raise your taxes 1 cent. Each of these statements claimed to have no exemptions, no qualifications, and no conditions. But here we are just 40 weeks later with one-party rule, and the President has already broken these promises to the American people. He has broken them because inflation is a tax on every American. President Trump and congressional Republicans took a better path. We cut taxes and left Americans with more of their hard-earned money in their pockets. Mr. Speaker, it led to the best economy in 50 years. When taxes go up through inflation or otherwise, Americans have less for utilities, prescriptions, and other things they need. And as prices continue to soar, the inflation tax is hitting hard-working middle-class families the hardest. What do you think is going to happen to inflation if this bill becomes law? It's only even going to be greater than the first $2 trillion this body wasted, Mr. Speaker. But here's the dirty secret. Most Democrats who vote for these policies won't be affected by the inflation rate. But seniors, working families, and those living paycheck to paycheck have been and will continue to be, even in a greater sense. Through no fault of their own, good, hard-working Americans are being hurt by their own government. And Mr. Speaker, that's just wrong. What is the White House and the liberal media's response? Telling Americans to just accept it. Telling Americans to just accept it. Lecturing us to be more like Europe, to build our bureaucracies, saying we should lower our expectations. Lowering expectations is what it means to be an American? I think not. No, this is a nation that conquered the wilderness, sent a man to the moon, and developed a life-saving vaccine to COVID-19 in less than a year. Americans don't lower expectations. We rise to the occasion. But under one-party rule, in 1 year, we have inflation we haven't seen in 31 years. We have gas prices higher than we've seen in the last 7. We have Americans stranded once again in the Middle East being held hostage. We have a border unsecured with fentanyl coming across increasing by 300%. Every city in America is a border city now. We have Putin with a pipeline, but a president who tells Americans no. We have a president who looks to OPEC to produce more, not American energy.
We want American roughnecks.
Another area where President Biden and Democrats in Congress are failing. Mr. Speaker, they are right. The House is not in order.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, another area where President Biden and Democrats in Congress are failing is in the energy crisis. The American people want to afford gasoline, afford to heat their homes, and enjoy the upcoming holidays together. But what are they going to have? The most expensive Thanksgiving in the history of America. God forbid you have to drive for Thanksgiving because you're going to pay more. They don't need their government spending billions of dollars to subsidize car chargers or parks for the wealthiest people in the country. Mr. Speaker, it's not just Republicans who warn you. Mr. Speaker, even Jared Golden on November 17th, the member of the Democratic Party, he said, if you told me a year ago that the second biggest piece of the signature bill of this Congress was $280 billion in tax giveaways to millionaires, I'd have told you Republicans were in charge. Proponents have been saying that the BBB taxes the rich, but the more we learn about the SALT provisions, the more it looks like another giant tax breaks for millionaires. The fact that more people and organizations on the Democratic side aren't up in arms about this is wild. Mr. Speaker, maybe they're not up in arms because they just got the bill. And you allowed 10 minutes on one side and 10 minutes on the other to debate it. Mr. Speaker, I know at times it's hard to hear what's in the bill, but I think the American people have a right to know. Over the last 9 months, with one-party rule in this city, families have watched energy prices rise dramatically. West Texas Intermediate has doubled since President Biden took office, and a gallon at the pump costs 60% more. You know where that comes from? The hard-working taxpayers who have to live in a lower standard because of one-party rule in Washington. What does that mean in everyday life? It means that when families fill up at the gas station, they're seeing the highest price of a gallon of gas in 7 years. The last time Joe Biden was in office, Mr. Speaker, it means that from the factories making new products to the trucks that transport them to the retail stores to sell them, every part of the supply chain is paying more for energy. In every state in America, the average price of a gallon of gas is now over $3 for the first time in years. In our home state, Mr. Speaker, of California, the average price is over $4.50. And in some parts, it's as high as $7. Mr. Speaker, when I listened to the White House, I thought they'd be concerned. They said it was good. People should pay more. The pain is being felt beyond the pump too, Mr. Speaker. When families turn on the lights or heat their home this winter, they're expected the price of heat will be 54% higher. Mr. Speaker, when we're back in these chambers next year, I will wonder how somebody on a fixed income chooses to pay their heating bill, or maybe go cold throughout the night. The energy crisis we face today is devastating for working families. Every dollar spent on gasoline is a dollar that isn't spent on groceries or other essential goods. And yet the reaction from this administration, who kneecapped oil and natural gas production by canceling new pipelines and freezing new lessees altogether. When asked if the United States would increase energy production, the Secretary of Energy told CNBC, "That's hilarious." Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that's not funny to the American public. That's not funny. They expect more from their leaders. They expect to look out for them, not Washington and one-party rule looking out for themselves. Go watch the video for yourself. It's just a few seconds. It perfectly captures the Biden administration incompetent contempt for the American people. Mr. Speaker, I can wait.
Gentlemen to suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as I listen to the other side make their comments, not once did I say something. I disagreed with what they said, but I knew there was a moment in time when I could speak. I know, Mr. Speaker, that people might disagree with what I say, but we're in America. We're in Congress. I respect their position, even though I believe it's wrong. I respect that they may believe they want to build up these bureaucracies. I respect that they think spending more with inflation, that somehow that won't cause more. I respect the idea that you shut down an American pipeline and allow Putin to have one, and the prices go up. I think you're wrong, but I respect the right for you to say it. Mr. Speaker, not once did I look at Chairman Neal and tell him he couldn't look at me. Not once did I say something to him as he made his point. I don't know that, Mr. Speaker, just last week we set a record here, twice, by holding a vote open longer than this Congress ever has. We have changed more of the history in Congress than at any time of any Congress under one party and one rule. Members get fined $5,000 when somehow they walked through a magnetometer and they didn't hear. Do they get any recourse? No, they get a letter. Mr. Speaker, you may have set a record tonight. They're trying to control the House. I would think, Mr. Speaker, regardless, maybe they don't like hearing what's in the bill because they haven't read it. But I think, Mr. Speaker, the American public has a right to hear it. And, Mr. Speaker, I will tell you this. I don't care how many times I'm interrupted. I'm not going to stop till the American people hear it. Mr. Speaker, I know the Speaker says we have higher standards. I'm just hoping to see them. It also isn't funny for Californians like Scott Daniel, who runs Young's Commercial Transfer in Porterville, California. Scott told me that higher prices are making it hard to stay in business. Scott says, Mr. Speaker, my company alone will burn around 3 million gallons of fuel this year. And with fuel as expensive as it is right now, that adds $1 million to our bottom line, which makes it really hard to stay in business and keep it going. More importantly, it's immediately going to hit all of your food at the grocery store. Mr. Speaker, that's why your Thanksgiving in America is going to be the most expensive. The President talks about a world where every nation plays by the same rules. But when it comes to global elites, he makes sure the rules he applies to us don't apply to them. That's how socialism works. You see, they build up the bureaucracies. They spend more than they spent during World War II. It creates inflation. It creates supply chain problems. By the way, those who run society get ahead while those who make society run are pushed back. Republican knows there's a better path. Instead of wasting the energy potential in this country, we want to unleash it. We don't want to build up government. We want to build up American families. Instead of killing good-paying jobs, we want to create them. Instead of canceling the Keystone Pipeline, we want to complete it. Republicans will make America energy independent again through innovation, so working families have affordable, abundant energy. So the answer won't come that you'll have to pay more. What they'll hear is they'll pay less and have more for themselves. You know, I just mentioned Scott Daniel, the owner of a commercial transportation company, who talked about how high prices are hurting his ability to do business and deliver goods. But that's not the only way Democrat policies are making it harder for business to survive. Another is the labor shortage. Walk down any main street if the crime's not too bad for you to do it. Or a city avenue in America, and I guarantee there'll be help wanted signs. Ask a waiter how many shifts she or he does in a week, and I bet they are covering from someone else because they're short-staffed. Ask if they had to take anything off the menu because the restaurant can't afford to find it anymore. I bet they have. This is what our small businesses are dealing with. As a former small business owner, I know these conditions aren't sustainable. And Mr. Speaker, if Democrats just cared to listen, they'd know that too. Instead, Democrats' idea of economic plan is to punish citizens who are producing for our country and working to support their families, while rewarding themselves and others for staying home. Americans don't deserve to bear the brunt of policies pushed by one-party rule in Washington, who will never feel the effects of them and who will receive a solid paycheck every month, even if they show up to vote or not. You know, Joe Biden's presidency has often been compared to Jimmy Carter's presidency. He's proven that comparison wrong every step of that way. That comparison now is unfair to Jimmy Carter. Mr. Speaker, when you study the history of America, in the late 70s, 1980, Americans were held hostage in the Middle East. Today, we have hundreds of Americans being held hostage in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, in 1979, we had inflation, taxing of every American. Today, we have inflation we haven't seen in 31 years. Mr. Speaker, in the late 70s, we were beholden to OPEC. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have a president who begs OPEC. Mr. Speaker, in the late 70s, President Jimmy Carter told us The heater had to go down because the price is going up and we needed to expect less as Americans. Mr. Speaker, today, the White House laughs if you ask them what their plan for America to become energy independent and lower a gas price. Mr. Speaker, in the late 70s, we were concerned about the Soviet Union, of the buildup in Europe. Today, Mr. Speaker, Russia is building up along Ukraine. They have more money for more soldiers because they got a new pipeline. Why America was denied. Mr. Speaker, after the 1980 election, those problems went away because you no longer had one-party rule in Washington, D.C. You had policies that didn't talk about building up a bureaucracy. You had policies that unshackled what held back the American worker. When those policies were enacted, a decade later, there was no longer a Soviet Union. There was no longer two Germanys. A Berlin Wall had collapsed. The shipyard workers of Poland understood. They knew that America was more than a country, that America's an idea. "32 years ago, 1 million students went to Tiananmen Square. They built the Lady of Democracy, Mr. Speaker. It looked just like the Statue of Liberty. They put it directly across from the portrait of Mao. They understood the greatness of America. Who doesn't remember that man standing in front of the tank when China was rolling in? He stood in front of that tank. When the tank moved to the right, he moved to the right. When the tank moved to the left, he moved to the left. Then he climbed on top of that tank. I cannot tell you his name, Mr. Speaker, because I doubt that he's alive. They respected America. They knew what America stood for. Mr. Speaker, now we have a bill that will bring more ships from China to America because it will give them an incentive. Mr. Speaker, I hear your party talk a lot about a Green New Deal. 90% of all those are being built in China. So you're taking the hard-earned taxpayer of Americans. You're shutting down the policies you don't like, the energy you don't care for, and laying those off while making the gasoline price higher and taking their tax dollars and shipping it to China. And you're creating a greater inflation, Mr. Speaker. One-party rule for 1 year. Mr. Speaker, if there's good news for America, it's less than a year away. It's less than a year away. I tell you, America, help is on the way. History repeats itself. And oh, it's going to repeat itself big next November. Mr. Speaker, while the Democrats' action on our economy, such as anti-work welfare programs and massive, unneeded stimulus, has left Americans worse off, it's their inaction along the southern border that has left our country less safe. You see, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just Americans left behind in Afghanistan. It was billions of dollars of our military equipment. Mr. Speaker, do you realize that the Taliban has more Black Hawk helicopters than 2/3 of the NATO countries? More than Australia? Mr. Speaker, do you realize when Bagram shut down and 5,000 of some of the worst human beings escaped? Mr. Speaker, do you realize by the Biden administration of opening up our border, more than 160 countries of people have come across that border? Mr. Speaker, they don't have to wear a mask or be fined. They don't even have to be tested. The government actually pays them for a trip somewhere in America. Mr. Speaker, I'll wait till we're in order.
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate you, Mr. Speaker. Inaction on the southern border. Mr. Speaker, almost every single Republican on this side of the aisle has been to visit the border, almost more than once. Mr. Speaker, I heard the president, who's been in office more than 40 years, say he drove by El Paso one time. But Mr. Speaker, when we went to the border earlier this year, after one-party rule in Washington that changed by executive order, I can wait, Mr. Speaker. They can finish their conversation. You can finish. No, you can finish. Don't lower your mask, you'll get fined. You're going to get fined. I'm just warning you.
Gentlemen will suspend.
Mr. Speaker, I know you hold the gavel, but I heard from your side of the aisle telling me when to speak, where to look, and what to do, and interrupted me many times. I've heard your speaker talk about a higher standard. I'm waiting to see it, Mr. Speaker. Are you going to laugh too, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I know, Mr. Speaker, I know your side of the aisle has no problem.
Okay, this is Andrew Kraft here with LiveNOW from Fox, and we have been listening to a marathon-long speech by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, going on well over an hour now. And because he is in the leadership, he's allowed to speak for as long as he wants during this debate preceding the vote on the Build Back Better Act, going over all the things Republicans do not like about the Biden administration's agenda. So many different topics, a lot of talking points. Fiery words there from McCarthy. Let's listen back in.
We interviewed the families and asked how long they've been on the road. They said ever since President Biden told us to come. Ever since President Biden told us to come. As we sat with those brave men and women of our border protection, we watched what they had to do, the job they were doing day in and day out, the conditions, when COVID was rampant and nobody being tested. And we went up along the line against the wall. This is important, Mr. Speaker. I think people should listen. And I'll show you the point why. As we talked to the border agents, they told us they've seen something they've never seen before, where people would rush the wall. So everybody would go there, then they'd come the other way, the cartel, bringing fentanyl across. They said they'd never seen anything like it. And I asked them, I listened to the vice president.
Gentleman's recognized.
One-party rule, 1 year. As I sat and talked to the border agents, they told me of the border cities that had to close their schools because of the cartels coming through and shooting. Of the ranchers who are having their houses burned or their grandchildren kidnapped. Then they said something so shocking, I had to ask them twice. You see, I heard the vice president say, this is just Central America problem. I said, is that really what's happening? No, they told me people were coming from 160 countries. They said they just caught people on the terrorist watch list. I came down. We did a press conference. In the press conference, I mentioned that we had caught people on the terrorist watch list from Yemen. You remember the USS Cole? The American Navy ship that was bombed? Or maybe you need to refresh the memory of real recently. You know a U.S. embassy that was overtaken? No, I'm not talking back in Iran in 79. I'm talking about the comparison to today. As that I said that to the American public. I respect all of you. You come here because you want to legislate. I expect you would be shocked too. That you'd probably call me up. What can we do? You want to protect your constituents? I know you do. But Mr. Speaker, there was a member of the Democratic Party on the Intel Committee, tweeted, said I was lying. Said he gets the same intel as I do because I'm on the Gang of 8. Interesting, when I put the facts out, I don't know, maybe the mail's slow. I never once heard him apologize. Or worse yet, I've never once heard him say, how can we stop it? How can we stop it? I didn't even see an amendment added to this bill. Think about that for one moment for the American public. You are spending more money than we spent to end World War II. You're hiring 87,000 IRS agents. Not one Border Patrol agent. Not one new dollar. You're providing money for amnesty. You're providing money, $450,000, for people who came here illegally. And you're taking it from American hardworking taxpayers. But you do nothing to stop those on the terrorist watch list from coming across this border. Nothing. There has been nearly 1.7 illegal border encounters at the southern border since President Joe Biden became president. And our border czar, Vice President Kamala Harris, still has no plan to support our border patrol. Now let's put this in perspective. There has been more illegal border crossing between the months of February and October under Joe Biden than in 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. So when somebody asks me, what does it mean if you have one-party rule for 1 year? You get more illegal crossings simply from February to October than you did in 2018, 2019, and 2020, all combined. What do you think's going to happen after the billions of dollars you spend in this bill providing amnesty? That number will look small to you. But I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, some people say, let's wait and see what the CBO says. So when the CBO comes back and tells you, you got millions more, it's okay, we'll still vote. Let that sink in. What's the Biden administration reaction? They're now considering paying illegal immigrants $450,000 per family. An action that President Biden admits would incentivize more people to come over illegally. Mr. Speaker, when we tell our children's children about this night, we'll tell them that's where their future went. When they ask us why do they pay such high taxes, we'll remind them about this night. Because we built up our bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, you're actually celebrating this bill. You're actually celebrating this bill. That's more than some of the 9/11 victims received. Can you think about that? How do you explain, Mr. Speaker, as my friend Steny Hoyer said so proudly, mentioned today for our children's children, how do we explain that those that were killed on that fateful day of 9/11 received less than those who came across illegal? It's okay, I'll be here a long time.
House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry if it...
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I've got to apologize to you. I think I'm upsetting people on the other side of the aisle when I tell them what's in the bill. They just yelled at me that they're leaving. I apologize. Mr. Speaker, nobody on this side of the aisle wrote this bill. I thought that was going to be different, Mr. Speaker, because I took President Biden at his word. I took him at his word when he said he was going to get COVID under control. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, more Americans have died this year than last year under COVID. Mr. Speaker, the $450,000, that's more than some of the 9/11 victims received. It's more than the next of kin receives in insurance of those 13 Gold Star families that got killed by a suicide bomber who was in the prison of Bagram. Mr. Speaker, I watched in disbelief as President Biden said he'd do nothing different. I watched in disbelief, Mr. Speaker, when he had a press conference and he told Americans it was safe to come to the airport. In less than 30 minutes, you were on that conference call too, Mr. Speaker, where the Secretary of State, Joint Chiefs said no, it wasn't safe to come to the airport. Mr. Speaker, there are many people that have served this nation, served in the armed services, and on both sides of this aisle. I have never watched members work so hard to get the American hostages out of Afghanistan to only be shut down by our own State Department. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you of a personal story. Mr. Speaker, I picked up the phone one morning when this first started, and I called the regular number to the White House. And I said, I'd like to talk to the President about what's happening in Afghanistan. The White House recently called, wanted to know if it was really me. To the President's credit, he called me back. I said, Mr. President, I know you're trying to hold this deadline for the Taliban, but what about our allies? What about those from the UK and France who fought side by side, not because their country was attacked, but because we were attacked? He told me he wasn't going to budge. I said, Mr. President, there are thousands of Americans that are held there that can't get out. He said, Kevin, no, the number's much smaller. I said, Mr. President, what is the number then? Oh, it's just smaller. I've watched the President look America in the eye and tell us he would not leave till every American's out. What do you say to those Americans that are still stuck there? The last time we felt like this, Jimmy Carter was president. Mr. Speaker, what does it say to those Gold Star families? Mr. Speaker, I had one in my office, a father who had his daughter, who wasn't even supposed to be there but volunteered. She was an electrician. Just days before, you see photos of her holding a young child. She told her sister, I'm going out in front of the wall because you can't believe it. Someone needs to be there for them. She wasn't supposed to be out in front of that wall. When that suicide bomber that was locked up in Bagram, that never should have got out, that we never should have shut down, killed 13 of the finest Americans we know. You know what this bill does? Nothing for them. It gives more money to an illegal person who crossed this border. I'm sorry. Americans expect more. Our priorities should be different. These people risk their life every day for us. Just let that sink in to your children's children. One-party rule for 1 year has brought us inflation we haven't seen in 31 years. Gas price is the highest it's been since the last time President Biden was down at the White House. A Thanksgiving that's going to cost you more at any time in your life. A border where 1.7 million encounters. A border between February and October that more people have crossed than 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. And Mr. Speaker, the closest the president has ever been to the border in 42 years is to drive through El Paso. Mr. Speaker, a vice president who is the czar of the border. This isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. This is the safety of this nation. What do you think's going to happen to that border when you provide $1 billion in amnesty? What do you think's going to happen when you reward people with $450,000? Where do you get the money? From the hardworking taxpayers of America who have less to give. But you know what? They're going to have to give more because you're hiring 87,000 IRS agents to come after them. 1.2 million more audits. And half of all those 1.2 are going after Americans who make $75,000 or less. That's what you base this entire bill on. That's what you waited for the CBO to tell you. How much money can we get from them? How is that possible? The payments for illegal immigrants is just the latest data point in a much larger trend of failures on this border. Cheered on by left-wing activists, President Biden and Vice President Harris have presided over the greatest series of border security blunders in American history. Mr. Speaker, if 160 different countries have had people come across that border illegally, if we have caught people on the terrorist watch list, if a suicide bomber got out of Bagram and in 1 week killed 13 American soldiers, do you think they know how to get into America? Do you think they know where to go? Maybe they have to go at night. They got a better chance now because they've got night goggles that we had. They got Black Hawk helicopters. They have more Black Hawk helicopters, the Taliban, than 2/3 of our NATO countries. They have more than Australia. In that phone call with the president, you know what he told me? Oh, Kevin, we're going to have a lot of leverage with the Taliban because they're going to need help running their country. Why don't you tell that to the hundreds of Americans that are still there trying to get out? And every time there's a member on this side of the aisle that goes upon themselves because they care about their constituents and they try to get that American out, the State Department attacks them. You try to criticize them. They risk their own life. And Mr. Speaker, even in our own hearings, I respect greatly anyone who served in uniform, and you have some tremendous members on the other side of the aisle have. And I watched them question the Secretary of State and still not get an answer. Mr. Speaker, to that member on your side of the aisle that sits on Intel, that said I wasn't telling the truth, that we were catching people on the terrorist watch list, that has done nothing about it since. I wonder if he should serve on Intel next term. Because America needs to be protected. For anyone who thinks they're not a border city, just look up how many deaths you have in fentanyl. And let me tell you where fentanyl comes from. It comes across that border, but it comes from China. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you another story. I have a friend who serves in the Senate. Right before COVID, he was on a Codell with other senators. And he was sitting and having a communication, maybe you've experienced this as well, with a military general in the Chinese Communist Army. You know what that general said to him? America, you're weak. You're weak, America. You're weak because you believe in God and you take fentanyl. Fentanyl has increased 300%. Only because the border is not secure. There is no city in America that is safe. This is deadly. They've handed the border over to the cartels, unleashing these monsters onto our people. And they compromised our national security. Answer me this question, Mr. Speaker. If somebody's on the terrorist watch list, and Mr. Speaker, they entered our state of California. They haven't entered one. They weren't together. They came on different days. And you know right now, if you're a member of Congress and you ask them how many more you got, they don't want to tell you. Just as they don't want to give us the number of how many Americans are still stuck there. They're hoping if we don't pay attention anymore, we'll forget. I promise you this, we will not forget. And we will not stop. Here is what the National Border Patrol Council President Brandon Judd told us, and I quote, "This administration says it's just Central American countries. But in just 1 week in Yuma, Arizona sector, we've seen people illegally enter from countries like Egypt, Russia, Armenia, Georgia, Haiti, Portugal, and Uzbekistan. There's no better time for them to come into our country than now." I didn't think Egypt or Russia was in Central America. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to offer this invitation. We got Thanksgiving coming. We're both from California. Why don't we invite the Vice President to come down to the border with you and I both, and let's take a tour. And while we're there, let's go to the Port of LA and Long Beach and talk about the supply chain. Let them see that these ships that are waiting and coming in, when they unload, they go back empty to pick up more from China. They don't load American products. Now, it may take a little while to get from the border of San Diego up to Long Beach, so we may have to stop to get gas. I'll split it with you because I know it's not cheap. But I'm willing to make that offer. These patrol members along the border, they bear the brunt of dangerous policies While the Democrats act like there's nothing going on, Texas Mayor Don McLaughlin told us, Mr. Speaker, just a few months ago, nearby cities are expected to see an inflow of migrants much larger than the size of the towns themselves. He said, and I quote, "We're not equipped in our area to handle this. Our resources are strapped as it is because of the pandemic." The mayor said his own town will try to quarantine COVID-positive migrants in hotels. But when they come back to check on them or bring them food, some of the migrants are gone. You know, that's just not here. You know, when we departed Afghanistan, a lot of people got on that were never searched or gone through any process. We put them on military bases in America. Some just depart. Some people have already been arrested for crimes they created. When we heard from our constituents that were stuck in Afghanistan, who said they went to the airport because they watched the president tell them, and the Taliban grabbed their papers, tear them up and shoot at them. Or they're hiding in the halfway houses, and the State Department denying, just letting them get across the border so they can get out. Aside from the health risks, these circumstances create physical risks for innocent bystanders. There are not enough officers or agents to handle the intake and regular patrol, so the issues are spilling onto the streets. Now, I'm sure in your committees, Mr. Speaker, as you went through this bill, as you knew you were going to spend more than at any time in American history, because the Chief of Staff to the White House, and many times, Mr. Speaker, people refer to him as the Prime Minister, he said this is twice as big in real dollars as the New Deal. You must have thought somewhere when you saw these statistics, it's okay, we've got so much money, let's put some and help those border agents. I'm sure somebody raised that issue, did they not? It must have been voted down because it's not in the bill. But whoever raised their hand and said, let's spend $1 billion to give people amnesty, that made it in. The only thing I question, Mr. Speaker, why did you stop there? Because there's going to be billions more coming. You were able to do in one-party rule in 1 year, just between February and October, more than everybody's been able to do in the 18, 19, and 20 combined. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if that's what you talk about, building bigger bureaucracies, but this bill does it. Mayor McLaughlin said they have about 2 to 3 car chases a week back in 2019. Then none for a few weeks. Now it's every single day. Roughly 10 to 12 high-speed car chases per week. He says, and I quote, "It's escalating. We've had houses broken into. We had to put our schools on lockdown because they're armed out in town near these schools. When that happens, then we have to pull all the officers out on manhunts." How would you like to represent a city that every single day, roughly 10 to 12 high-speed car chases? I remember on the news when there was one, the whole nation would watch. They don't even put them on because they're every day. But where are they running by? And it's not a car chase, just a cop chasing them. It's a cartel with weaponry. They're going by schools. In America, in American schools, they have to shut down because you opened the border. You do nothing to protect it in this bill. You only incentivize more people to come. Did you put any money in here for car chases? Did you put any money in here for the schools? I hope you put money in here for drug treatment. Because, Mr. Speaker, there's sure a lot of fentanyl coming across that border. He told us recently that just last spring, they had to put schools on lockdown 48 times. Think about that. Your child goes to a school, just in spring, 48 times they're on lockdown. You think your child feels safe? You think your child's learning? What do you think those parents are going to think when they hear about this bill? I don't think they could just leave the chambers. I think they'll probably want to come to a school board meeting. Maybe the FBI will investigate them for terrorism because they care about their children's safety. One-party rule in 1 year has brought America to this. Our children's education and lives are being interrupted nearly 50 times in just a few months. That's in America. When personnel and resources are pulled from one area to another along our border community, it leaves families like Russell Johnson's in danger. You see, Russell lives on a ranch with his family in New Mexico, just miles from the border. I'm proud of my family. My family immigrated from Ireland and Italy. They worked on a railroad, and they became a cattle rancher. It was a tough life. My grandfather got married, lived with his brother on the ranch, but the ranch didn't make enough to pay for both. So he went back to working on the railroad. To make money as a rancher, they never had to worry about a cartel. They just had to worry if it rained enough or if the cattle price was high enough. Russell Johnson, it's remote, and it gets little service where he lives, making it a prime place to illegally enter the country. This is what Russell told us. With the way things are right now, we don't let our kids play outside by themselves. They can't play outside by themselves. This isn't Chicago. This is on a cattle ranch. There's no telling who they might encounter while they're out there. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to invite Russell Johnson to come to D.C. And I want to invite anybody on the other side of the aisle that votes for this bill. And I would ask you to take his questions. I would ask that you point out in this bill, where does it protect his children? As an American. I don't think he'll argue that you're going to cost him more. You see, the interesting thing is, I'm okay paying taxes if they go to something. Richard Neal says it's going to build a bigger bureaucracy. Not along the border, it's not. It's tearing down walls. Schools are closing. You know, for the first time in the country, Mr. Speaker, this generation doesn't believe they'll be better off than the generation before them. And this bill almost guarantees it. They're guaranteed they're going to have to pay more and get less. I'll be sure and let you all know of that date. You're celebrating the bill. Celebrate with Russell and tell him where he's better off. Just think for a moment that in America, children can't play outside on their own property for fear of their safety from cartels and traffickers. I'm not talking about the cities where you defunded the police. I'm talking about remote cattle ranches. In a place I think every American dreams they could retire one day, on a ranch. Build back. You're going all the way back to the Westerns, I guess. People have to fend for themselves. I can't believe that's America. I don't accept it. I know we're better than that. I know some of you are mad at me, think I spoke too long. But I've had enough. America has had enough. Not only do communities at the border deserve protection, the selfless men and women of our Border Patrol deserve more support to do their jobs. I don't know if you've been down to tour with them. If any of you are going, you want to make it bipartisan? I'll go. I know a lot of people on this side of the aisle will go with you. Because we think it's an American problem, that we want to solve it together. But when someone comes across the border, and you have the children, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, when it became one party with 1 year, you change the definition, they're no longer cages. Still the same place. But it's the border agents who have to go off the border and inside to care for them. So the border's less secure. And now you're providing more money for them to come, less agents there, and it's just a spiraling effect. You know, between inflation, gas prices, the border, crime, there's a common denominator. One-party rule in Washington for 1 year. U.S. Border Patrol members from the Southwest Division of the border alone saved 4,920 lives in 2019. 5,071 lives in FY20. 12,833 lives in 21. And 836 in 22 so far. Why don't we pass a bill to honor our Border Patrol agents? Why don't we bring them here to Washington? Better yet, why don't we go to them? It's our job to secure the border. You're spending trillions of dollars. You know what you're spending money on? Not to build the wall. You're taking taxpayer money on material they already have there and paying them not to build it. So Russell Johnson's children can't play. That's what you're taking taxpayers' money for. That's why you're hiring more IRS agents to audit more Americans to get more out of them, because you don't trust that they're honest. There's not a day that doesn't go by. Just this week, of a 5-year-old child all by himself. You know, one of the trips down the border, I was talking to this Border Patrol agent. And I was asking her about her job. You could tell the stress that she has felt. To work under these conditions, the threat of the cartel, the crime coming across, the families, the children. And she told a story of 3 young children she saw out in the distance. The oldest was 5, the next was 3, and the other was 11 months. I said, where was the parent? There was no parent. Well, what crowd was she with? No, they were all alone. If she had not found them, they would not have lived. So let this sink in. You're encouraging more of them to come. People don't make it all the time. People are raped. Human trafficking happens because they don't have the money to pay the cartel. Then when they come to America, they have to work to keep paying them. You're incentivizing that. And while you incentivize that, you make Americans unsafe. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, it's something that the just administration does in the cabinet or everywhere when they're asked a question. I know what the Secretary of Energy did when she asked about how to lower prices. She just laughed. But I remember, Mr. Speaker, when Vice President Kamala Harris was asked about the border. She has a very definite laugh. You know what her answer was? Well, I haven't been to Europe either. Well, she could go to Europe because people from Europe are coming across that border too. She'd go to Russia, Egypt, Yemen. She'd go around the world. Now, speaking of safety and security, these hardworking Americans being ignored by Democrat politicians. Let's talk about law enforcement. Because, Mr. Speaker, I remember on this floor in the last Congress of the chant, defund the police. I remember what this city looked like. I remember one night looking out and the rioters. I remember the speaker yelling about having the National Guard at the Lincoln Memorial. That spread across America. I can't keep count of how many people die in Chicago in one weekend. In Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered and shouldn't have been. When they decided to defund the police, it was on the ballot 2 weeks ago on Tuesday. It failed. Mr. Speaker, you and I have known each other a long time. We're competitive. I know you didn't get to Congress your first time out. We beat you that first time, but you came back. You're competitive. You work hard. It's not my job to give you political advice. But I don't know if you've seen the numbers. It's nothing we're doing. You know, 110 polls have been taken since 1981. Never have they reflected what they reflect today. But it's just not that. You see, we all have the pleasure and the honor. Less than 13,000 people have ever had this honor to represent in this chamber. The debates that have taken place here. And on the biggest of items, it's always bipartisan. The president promised he'd bring that back. There hasn't been one time. Not one time. Tonight is not bipartisan. You didn't work with anybody. You're spending the most money ever spent on a single bill in the history of America, the greatest nation ever on the face of the earth. And your children's children will read, it was one party, rule for 1 year. Mr. Speaker, I watched the American voter in states that are blue states overwhelmingly reject, from Seattle to Minneapolis to New York to New Jersey to Virginia, to reject exactly what's in this bill. Look, it would be beneficial to me to cheer you on. I care too much about this country. If you turn back now, you might be able to survive. But I know what will be more important. America could survive. But I know you're down on this floor, just 10 minutes debate on each side, and the bill just came. I know my friends on the other side of the aisle are mad. I know some of them got to get to Puerto Rico for a fundraiser. I'm sorry. That may be one of them. Sounds like a couple of them. This is too important to America. It is a moment in time. At a time when violent crime is spiking nationally, cities under Democratic rule have or are seeking to defund their police departments. It's just another move lacking common sense, logic, or leadership. In Los Angeles, I represent a little of it. I don't think you have any of it, right? Just outside. You're to the east of it. The LAPD budget is set to be cut by $150 million. A decision triggered by widespread protests. My son just moved to San Francisco with his new wife. You know what he told me? He said, "Dad," he had to buy a car, moved up there. "Dad, I'm excited. I got car insurance." I didn't think that was a big deal. "But my street is the safest street in San Francisco. I got a little saving." You know what people put on their windows in San Francisco on the cars? "Please don't break the window again, nothing's inside." You know, if you want to walk to a Walgreens in San Francisco, it's closed. Because it can't make money. Because people just come in and take. That's how you build up bureaucracy. That's how you cut police. In Austin, the city council voted to cut up $150 million from its police department. You know, Mr. Speaker, you and I have seen a lot of business in California leave and go to the city of Austin. A good friend of mine, Elon Musk. He built a car company when others were already developed. Said he couldn't do it. He risked his wealth to do it. It's pretty dang successful. A state rep in California, I can't use the language they used on the floor, it started with an F, tweeted at Elon because he wanted to expand his business. So he left.
Okay, we are going to just go to a very, very quick commercial break. We're going to be continuing to follow all the coverage there on the House floor as Kevin McCarthy now going for almost 2 hours there as we thought this vote was going to be happening tonight. It's getting late there in Washington, D.C., so I guess that does remain in the air. We'll have more on that in just a moment on if this vote will happen, the Build Back Better Act vote in the House. But you've heard McCarthy now for almost 2 hours, railing against the Biden administration, talking about immigration, inflation, the supply chain, the border, what have you. Afghanistan, he brought up. Gas prices, he brought up there. A very fiery exchange, too, with some of the House Democrats on the other side of the aisle, trading barbs and quips and the like. And so he's not done yet. He seems to be giving no indications that he's going to be stopping. So we'll be back in 2 minutes here on Live Now from Fox, but we'll have more from the House floor in just a moment.
There are people in the administration at the highest of offices that gave money to bail these people out. I wonder why Russell Johnson worries about his kids playing outside. Biden also supports a bill passed by the House Democrats, which would cost police departments hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not a Democrat, Green Party, Republican. America, people want safe streets. I don't care if you live in the poorest neighborhood to the wealthiest. You want your kids to be able to walk down that street. I can't forget that video of those two young kids in New York walking while another man is shooting another man. They want law and order. Is it any surprise that overwhelmingly rejected defunding the police when it was on the ballot? The only place it passes defunding police is on this floor. But if you let the people vote, they say no. Why? They want to be safe. That's not rocket science. In the liberal enclave of Seattle, former home of the so-called Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Remember that? Where they took over an entire street. Why'd they do it? Because they were building a bigger bureaucracy. You see, they didn't believe in private property. They celebrated it, just like you celebrate this bill. The voters elected a Republican as the city attorney over a self-described police abolitionist.
Okay, so we have still been listening to House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy there on the floor, going on now about 2 hours, talking about a whole host of issues, railing against the Biden agenda, the Democrats' spending plans there, as we thought in this hour would be the vote for the Build Back Better Act. That's not going to be happening. Right now, though, I want to be joined by Fox News congressional correspondent Chad Pergram. Chad, good to see you, and thanks for being with us at this hour. I know there's been a lot of fireworks on the House floor. Did you expect Kevin McCarthy to be speaking this long tonight in the run-up to this vote?
We really didn't. I mean, it has become a bit of a tradition from time to time for leaders on both sides of the aisle to come out and kind of, make their case before big votes, and sometimes take, wide swaths of time. Technically, they're only allowed, a minute. You hear the language when they yield to them. We recognize so-and-so for 1 minute. But they give great deference to the party leaders to talk pretty much as long as they want. This tradition kind of started with John Boehner when he was the minority leader in 2009. I remember the Democrats were trying to move what was called the cap and trade bill. This was the big environmental piece of legislation, and he took the floor for about an hour and a half, and they started to call that the filibaner. Play on the word filibuster. You don't have a filibuster in the House of Representatives, but they called that the filibaner because he chewed up all this time. You also had a scenario in February of 2018 where then House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi came to the floor and spoke for more than 8 hours. It was the longest speech in House history, talking about dreamers and immigration policy, and people noted she did it in high heels. She did not take a break. So this has started to happen a little more frequently. They only had 20 minutes of debate left on this section of the bill. They debated the guts of this bill earlier in the day. And so, you get down, you hear the party leader, Steny Hoyer, the majority leader, he spoke earlier. He spoke more than a minute, the magic minute, as it's called here in the House of Representatives. He spoke for about 7 or 8 minutes, but nothing like this. And so, as you say, Kevin McCarthy has been going for more than a couple of hours here. And when he finishes, we might hear from the Democrats. We might hear from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She might not go on very long. I remember when she was the speaker the first time after John Boehner's filibaner, she came down to the floor and said, I got 3 things to say. Vote for jobs, vote for jobs and yielded back her time. So maybe she'll do the same thing and they will get on with the vote series. I should note that when they start to vote, Andrew, the first vote is not on the social spending plan. The second vote in the series will be on that. So probably about 35 to 40 minutes whenever they start that vote series, that's when they will start the second vote on the social spending package.
And Chad, let's kind of walk back a little bit of how we got here tonight. Speaker Pelosi had wanted this vote to happen before the Thanksgiving holiday. Of course, they were waiting for that CBO score today that did come out. Can you go into that a little bit? What did the score say?
Well, moderate Democrats had held out. They wanted this final CBO score here. You need it in the Senate before you can actually take up the bill and kind of process it through all the strict budgetary rules over there. But sometimes members use these CBO scores as a fig leaf, sometimes to say, oh, this justifies me voting for something, or also to give them a reason to vote no. Basically, something that we've heard a lot from the Democrats is that this bill will not add to the deficit. Guess what it does? Now, some of the numbers, the straight CBO score says it adds $367 billion to the deficit over a decade-long period. That's not quite right, because what is put into this bill as well is about $200 billion in extra IRS enforcement, where they think they can recoup some money from people trying to get around the tax man. So that brings this down to about $160 billion. That's a bit of good news for the Democrats, but to say that this bill is completely paid for is not the case. And here's the dirtiest little secret of all on Capitol Hill. These bills, these big bills, Republican or Democrat, almost whenever they pass these, they are almost never ultimately paid for.
And that is one of those talking points we've heard from Democrats over the last several weeks, that this is fully paid for, that it will not be adding to the deficit. It's going to be a very, very late night, Chad. We thank you for your time. We'll talk to you again.
Surely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we want to move on and go back out to the House floor as House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy still speaking. We're going to be airing that. We know there's a lot of added interest, a lot of viewers right now on a lot of our different platforms. So back to the House floor.
Speaker, the Prime Minister or the Chief of Staff of the White House said, this is bigger than a bill we spent on the New Deal. So there must be some money in here for hypersonics. I know you don't want to protect the border, but you surely want to protect us for our defense, do you not? Because it's going to lose $800 billion in 5 years. But you could tell your children's children the reason why you borrowed the money so they could be alive in America and not in China. But that's not in here. So, Mr. Speaker, what are you going to tell the children's children? You got a really big bill, and we can't protect you. But you got a lot of good products you can buy made in China. General Milley described the launch as a near Sputnik moment. Mr. Speaker, I imagine you and I weren't alive with Sputnik. But you know what happened after that? America acted as one. They knew the threat of the future. So when someone on the floor that night that focused, they said our children's children would remember this night. We thank them for that. We won the Cold War. Not because we rewarded people who came here illegally with $450,000. We won that war because we invested in the future. We won that war not because we built up bureaucracy, because we unshackled our private sector. We won that war not because we kept having inflation. We ended one-party rule and had the biggest economy we've had since the last time Republicans were in power and passed the tax cuts. The sad part, Mr. Speaker, President Biden could have done nothing. Part of me feels sorry, Mr. Speaker, for all of you. Because had he done nothing, I don't know if we could have won in a year. But because of his actions, America's weaker. When Russia launched Sputnik, the United States responded with a sense of urgency and a show of industrial force. So when China did this hypersonic, what did we do? You're passing a bill that is incentivizing companies to leave America to be in China. The global minimum tax. Ooh, you make more, go to China. That's what your children's children will learn. But don't worry, you can celebrate. You're going to have a big bureaucracy in America. Remember, that's what the Soviet Union had. But today, the Biden administration has responded with weakness, not strength. They actually said that stiff competition between China and America is welcome. Look, I would like competition, but why don't we have it on a level playing field? Why is China given an advantage? I was in a classroom a little while back, and we were talking about how did California, the Golden State, where everybody wanted to be, why is Toyota, why is Tesla, why is everybody leaving California? Then they got into the aspect of America. How did China rise? Well, a student asked me, and I asked her if she played a sport. She said she was a swimmer. I said, well, let me try to answer your question in an analogy of swimming. Picture America at a swim meet after World War II against every other country. We jump into the water. Not only do we win, we dry off before second and third arrive. So in the next year, we think, that's a little unfair. The other countries got destroyed a little more than America. Why don't we put a tax on ourselves to help the others? So we put a little weight belt on. We still win, but we don't swim as fast. As the years progress, last time we had one party rule in 2010, you made this stimulus bill. So you put a 50-pound weight on. So now when we jump into the pool after this bill, we don't win. Everybody says, why don't you swim like you used to? But the real answer is, why don't you take off the weight belt and let us compete? You're adding another 50 pounds of weight to America. And you're enhancing China because I promise you this. China's not adding 87,000 IRS agents to go after their people. All you have to do as an American is spend $28. And the IRS is going to knock on your door. Don't think it's only going to happen to those millionaires. You're a family struggling, making $75,000. You used to take that vacation every year, but with inflation and gas price and heating oil going up, you tell your kids you can't. But we built the bureaucracy, so they're going to knock on your door. This bill, if you measure all the things it does in it, it rewards millionaires. It adds 1.2 million new audits by the IRS, and half of that goes after people making $75,000 or less. I know so many people like that. I worship with them, play sports, our kids interact. I don't know how I tell them I work in a body that celebrated doing that to them. I know what their struggles are. It's interesting. These people work hard. They dream of the American dream. And you just put hurdles in front of them. You put struggles. Families are going to have to move in together. But I'm going to tell them what you did. You helped everybody making $800,000 to get that electric car, that Tesla. You know, I still live in the very first house I ever bought. I can't afford a Tesla. People on my street I work with, somebody's car breaks down, we work on it together. We help one another. I remember driving home just the other day. There was a young family. It was the grandma, the mom, and the daughter. And she was pulled over at the side of the entrance to my neighborhood. Her hood was up. Her car was overheating. I pulled up. I asked her if she needed help. She wasn't sure what was happening. I said, wait, I'm going to go right over to my house. It's a block away. I'll get some antifreeze. I'll get a towel. We'll open this up. We'll fix this. I come back. As I go to work in that car, another neighbor comes by. She's a grandmother. I've known her for years. She gets out with water bottles to give to the family. My daughter had made cookies. I brought cookies to the young child in the back. My other neighbor who works in the oil business. But you know what? He won't be my neighbor long. You see, you shut down his business. He told me he has to move. He doesn't live alone. His brother lives with him. He has roommates and young kids just to afford to live there. He pulls up. He gets some antifreeze. And everybody works together to get her back on her way. That's the American way. It's not building up big bureaucracies or raising the gas price, because the White House will tell you that's a good thing because you can afford a Tesla. We're going to take taxes from you. So somebody who makes $800,000 can get a tax break to buy a Tesla. I can't even afford to test drive a Tesla, and Elon's one of my best friends. And how is this competition going? For the Chinese Communist Party, it's not much of a fight. You see, Xi Jinping is not going to abide by the term limits of his constitution. But we should trust him. We should just compete together. Because when he told President Biden he wouldn't weaponize those islands, and he did, oh, Xi Jinping, you old friend, you. When he builds those aircraft carriers in the desert that look just like the American aircraft carriers. That's Xi Jinping. He just likes the Navy. When he tells Australia, when Australia asks, just to ask, where did COVID come from? We're sending our nuclear weapons right down to you. When Lithuania put a consulate for Taiwan this week. You see, Lithuania has a long history of big controlling countries next to them that try to push them around. But they know what freedom is. You know what Taiwan is? Taiwan is that young man who stood in front of that tank 32 years ago, who craved the freedom of speech, who understood America's more than a country. You know, when I look at this bill, it angers me. We are so better than this. You are spending so much money, never before. Think in our history books. Think of how we honor the honor flight. Think about the greatest generation that sacrificed so much. We spent less defeating Hitler, Mussolini, and Japan than you're spending tonight. We spent less, but it cost us lives. And you're celebrating it. You're celebrating it when inflation is at a 31% height. Gas prices, Thanksgiving, a border that in a few months breaks every record of the last 3 years combined. And now $1 is going to protect the border or make our children's children safer for the next generation. You know, I admired everybody with a job. My first job was at the quick and handy market. And people brought bottles back for a deposit. And my job in 110-degree temperature was to sort those bottles. It gave me a sense of worth. You may all admire Europe. You may admire building big bureaucracies. I know you even thought of a plan in here to tax people just on what you thought their world was worth. France did that and it failed. Mr. Speaker, we cannot become a socialist country. They have all failed. There's a reason America should lead, but we cannot lead if we're weakened. You know, a lot of you have been to my office. In my office, I keep portraits. I don't know if you know this, but I wasn't born a Republican. My family were all Democrats. If anybody questions me about my beliefs, I left what I heard at home because I knew there was something better. There are two leaders in this nation that still inspire me to this day. And I'm proud of who they are and what they did. And if you come to my office, you're welcome. We can disagree, but we should sit and talk. The problems of America are too big. We can find common ground. We would have found common ground here if we were welcomed. You see, I have this portrait of Abraham Lincoln. It's in black and white. A friend of mine painted it. His name's Penley. It's large, too. It's in black and white for a reason. The greatest challenge ever to our Constitution was the Civil War. While you're celebrating this bill tonight, you're doing it on the exact same floor we debated the 13th Amendment, or the day that will live in infamy, or the civil rights. And Mr. Speaker, the best thing you say is, we're going to build a bureaucracy. You know, it's the anniversary just this week of the Gettysburg Address. Can you imagine being President of the United States? You're not the keynote speaker. The keynote speaker speaks for 2 hours. I think I've already broken that record. I'm sorry if you're missing Puerto Rico's fundraiser. There weren't a lot of words. But this is what Lincoln said. Believe in the exceptionalism of America. Why? Because we're conceived in liberty and we're dedicated to the proposition that we're all equal. He goes on to say, but if we fail, government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from earth. We were not the world power at that moment. But he knew that America was more than a country. That when we work for and by and of the people, we will always lead. There is no other nation in the world that's conceived in liberty and dedicated that everybody's equal. So when you spend this new Green Deal money and you send it to China to buy the solar panels and the batteries, look at the slaves they make work there. Look at the slaves they make work. I'm proud Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president. And I'll tell you, at night, I look at these two paintings, and I wonder in moments in time, What if Abraham Lincoln was not assassinated? Malice towards none. There would be no Jim Crow laws. Mr. Speaker, I'd love to debate Jim Crow one day. Because another portrait just hanging down from Lincoln is Joseph Rainey, the first black American to get elected to Congress. He was a Republican. Mr. Speaker, 60 years later, the first black Democrat was elected to Congress. You see, Joseph Rainey was a slave and broke free and came back after the Civil War and got elected in Charleston, South Carolina. We defeated that original sin. But Joseph Rainey wasn't the only black Republican elected. More started getting elected. And in the South, we had a competitive presidential election. The Democrats said they would recognize the Republican if they moved the federal troops out of the South. And when they did, Democrat won the states. And they enacted Jim Crow laws. One of the darkest moments in our history. Had Abraham Lincoln not been assassinated, we would not have had to wait till the 50s for the civil rights. Abraham Lincoln, if he was here today, he would tell you. And Mr. Speaker, I believe he would look to your side of the aisle. He would say, be fearless when it comes to votes. Don't blame others. You see, when Lincoln was elected in November 1860, he wasn't sworn in until March 1861. It's late, so I'm not sure if my math is right, if it was 7 or 9 states that left the Union before he was sworn in. Never once did he blame Buchanan. Today, Mr. Speaker, I heard our border czar blame Trump for the border. I don't know, in the short months of one-party rule, they've broken all records. He would tell you this, though. Your children's children, do not put off tomorrow what you could do today. The debate of slavery didn't start in the 1850s. That original sin started at the creation of our country. Our forefathers thought it was too divisive, so they said, put it to the side. Hundreds of thousands of their grandchildren had to die. We don't have that same debate today. But you got a big debate on this floor. Do not blame others when inflation is higher. Do not blame others when your children ask you, why do you make the bureaucracy so big but keep the borders open and empower China? Why did my father and mother lose their jobs? Why can we not go downtown? Because there's no police to protect us. Or to that Russell Johnson grandson, our granddaughter, who can't carry on the legacy of a generation of a rancher. They'll point to this night, this time, and this moment. The other portrait that hangs behind my desk is Ronald Reagan. You see, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat too. But taxes became so high. You know what he did? He stopped working. It took the incentive away. Sound familiar? If you pay people more to stay home, they'll stay home. If you take away the work requirement, this bill now creates 90% of all Americans qualify for the child tax credit. But what'd you do? You took away the requirement to work, hurting the small business, then you took away the Social Security. You might as well take more American taxpayer money because you got all these IRS agents, but you're giving it to people who are not Americans. Reagan would tell us this. Reagan's in color and Reagan is smiling. And Mr. Speaker, I think at moments at times Reagan would talk to my party. We're not perfect by any means. He would tell us, if you believe your principles bring people more freedom, be happy about it. People will wonder what you're drinking. I'm a happy conservative, but not tonight. Reagan would tell us this, and he would talk to this entire body. And he would tell us, Mr. Speaker, peace without freedom is meaningless. Think about that for one moment. Peace without freedom is meaningless. It is human nature that we crave peace, but we only attain it with freedom. Reagan came into office after Jimmy Carter make inflation high. Americans held hostage. Gas prices, you can only go to the station on odd and even days. He was happy and honored to be able to do it. People had written us off. There were 2 Germanys. I remember in my high school, they had one of those Hallmark shows about the Soviet Union invading us, or Red Dawn. People on my street built bomb shelters because there was a Sputnik moment, much like a moment we just had. That's what our top military agents tell us, Mr. Speaker. You know, Reagan had this same dilemma. He was in his 2nd term. I believe he was in Iceland, sitting directly across from Gorbachev. They didn't take staff into the room. And Mr. Speaker, he started negotiating a nuclear reduction. And he was getting most everything he wanted. Then Gorbachev asked him one thing. Would Reagan end the SDI program? And remember what the SDI program at that one moment, it was made fun of, Mr. Speaker, by the Democrats. It was called Star Wars. Today, it's part of the Iron Dome. Mr. Speaker, you might remember the Iron Dome. Your party actually defunded that along with the police. Reagan didn't hesitate. He didn't ask Congress. He didn't ask the Senate. He said, no, I will not end the SDI. But what I'll do is I'll share with you so the world could be safe. Gorbachev declined. And Reagan looked at everything in there and he thought, it's a pretty good agreement. But he paused for a moment. It did nothing to those who were in the gulags. It did nothing for Lech Wałęsa in the shipyards of Poland. So he did something that most politicians couldn't do. He got up and walked away. Had Reagan not had that moment walked away, the Berlin Wall would have never collapsed in the Soviet Union. I tell you that story because I hope 5 of you listen. I hope 5 of you walk away from this bill. It doesn't bring more freedom. You cannot have peace without freedom. You know what's interesting? In modern history, there's been 2 U.S. presidents to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. Not Ronald Reagan and not Donald Trump after the Abraham Accords. Every elite press criticized Reagan, but he knew his principles. You know, Reagan didn't have one-party rule. The Speaker, Tip O'Neill, would spend time with him, would talk about the challenges. And when they talked about the challenges, they invested. Not for more illegals coming across the border, but to compete against Russia. Mr. Speaker, inside my conference room, I have another portrait. It's a big one. 8 feet by 16. It's a portrait of Washington crossing the Delaware. You all know that painting, do you not? This is a replica. Do you know who painted that painting? You know, it happened Christmas 1776. The person who painted it wasn't there that day. He painted it in 1850, 1851. He wasn't even an American. He was a German immigrant who lived in America, Emanuel Lentz. He lived here for about 10 years, I believe. And then he went back to Germany. And he knew the same thing that Lincoln knew about America. That America's more than a country, that we're an idea. An idea not of more bureaucracy, but of more freedom. And his talent was art, so he thought, I'll paint this painting to inspire my country to have a revolution based upon the freedoms of American democracy. He gets it historically incorrect. If you look at the painting, it doesn't look like the Delaware, it looks like the Rhine, but he's German. We give him a break, right? He puts Washington in a rowboat. Historians will tell you he probably crossed in a Durham boat. He puts 13 people in the rowboat. Why? 13 colonies. He only shows you 12 faces. If you ever look at the painting, and please come to the office, you could bring your constituents, I don't have to be there. But he has Washington in this ceremonial uniform, standing up in a rowboat in the middle of winter with his hand on his chest. You look at our founding father, and you would say that man is bigger in life. He's so stoic. I bet he's never lost a battle. But you know what history tells us? At that moment in time, Washington had only been a loser. He'd never won a fight. But if you Google this painting to see if I'm right, and you got your phones, you're welcome to do it. I don't want you to look at Washington. I want you to look at who's in the boat. The second person's wearing a beret. He's Scottish. The person in the green directly across from him, rowing in the exact same cadence, is African American. You come down the boat, in the middle is this person in the red. They look like they're the strongest. It's a woman. And in the very back is a Native American. Now, Mr. Speaker, I cannot tell you if that diversity was in the boat that night, but to this young immigrant who had lived in America, that's who he believed would be in the boat. Now, the second person to the last was a rancher, a farmer. I don't know if he was related to Russell Johnson or not. Occupation. And he has his hand across his face. You see, it's the hand of the 13th person nobody sees. But what this artist was saying, here we are, not a country, but an idea. Having lost every battle before us, but willing to risk everything on our holiest of nights for the idea of freedom. Here's a hand. Would you get in and join us? I wish we hung that portrait in here. I wish we would look at that portrait. That when we brought bills to the floor, that we were all rowing together. Because I will tell you, the challenge Washington faced that night, our two biggest challenges for the future are the debt and China. And this bill makes us a loser on both. Mr. Speaker, it spends more money than we spent for the entire World War II. It sends our jobs to China. It does nothing to stand up to them. But I know this. It's not too late. It might be late into the night. Mr. Speaker, members on your side of the aisle, they got staff. They could get a new plane to Puerto Rico. This is too important. There are moments in time that history that change the course of this country. And they've happened on this floor. The 13th Amendment. A day that'll live in infamy. We were bombed by Japan, almost wiped out our Navy. That Congress didn't turn around and say, let's take away work requirements. Let's give incentives to people who are coming illegally. And let's spend nothing on our defense. But let's make it bigger than any other bill we've ever had. And let's make sure nobody on the other side works with us. Now we're going into war. So we should send a letter to OPEC and to Putin. Because he could lower our gas price, help us out. This is that moment. We can have that courage. We can have that ability. It's not too late. Aside from hypersonics, the Pentagon is estimating China could have 1,000 nuclear warheads by the end of the decade. And last year they built 38 gigawatts of coal power plants. That one large coal plant every week. I know a lot of members on both sides of the aisle went overseas. Mr. Speaker, I know Speaker Pelosi has been able to be to Europe 3 times in the last 3 months. I don't know if it's a farewell tour. But if it is, I want a t-shirt. Mr. Speaker, we've been limited on what we can build nuclearly because of our agreement with Russia. China makes no qualms about what they want to do with Taiwan. And if you wonder, look at Hong Kong. My first trip ever to China was back in 1995. Some of you have probably gone, American Council of Young Political Leaders. They picked 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats under the age of 40 to go to China to interact, to find their leaders. I remember sitting in a room with a former UN ambassador. And he told me they became communists because they'd always been conquered by somebody else. That there used to be signs, no children's or dogs in Tiananmen Square. He says, we have no fear of being conquered now. So I don't know what binds us together. When I went to Tiananmen Square, it was moving for me because I remember that moment in time. There's 2 parts in history I wish I could have been a part of. I wish I could have been in Tiananmen Square, and I wish I could have been there knocking down that Berlin Wall. There was a sign there, Mr. Speaker. It had 2 moments. The number of days and the number of minutes to Hong Kong came under their control. They said for 50 years nothing would change. Mr. Speaker, after unleashing COVID on the world, it all changed. But you know what happened prior to that, Mr. Speaker? I'm not sure. I think Hong Kong had about 8 million people. Even on rainy Saturdays, 3 million of them would show up and bring umbrellas. You know what else they would bring? American flags. They knew the exact same thing Abraham Lincoln, Joseph Rainey, Frederick Douglass. And America's more than a country. And it's an idea. They stood out in the rain knowing what China would do for the freedom of speech, not for more bureaucracy. And the moment China came in, did we do anything? We're going to buy more batteries from them. They use slave labor to create it. If you question where COVID came, they say they're going to send their nuclear weapons to you. Look, I don't know if we know how many nuclear weapons they have because we can't fly over them much anymore. But do you ever wonder and start to think, if you have these nuclear weapons, you have hypersonics, and then you invade Taiwan, you think that may keep more people at bay? I don't know. When Putin took Crimea, he said he took it because no one said he couldn't. He's built up along the row of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, does it make you wonder after Afghanistan where Americans were left behind? That China flies more of their aircraft over Taiwan? That China did not show up at the global warming party? There's so many things to be proud of our country. I'm worried about the environment. I wish every country was like America. We lowered our CO2 emissions. We didn't mandate. You know what we did while we lowered them? We became energy independent. But you know what happens when you shut down an American pipeline and you allow a Russian pipeline to go? You make the air dirtier. American natural gas is 42% cleaner. You know what else comes with American natural gas? American jobs. American kids can pay for college. They can buy a car. They can buy a house. I don't know in today's America if they can afford to fill it up. But you're going to restrict America. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a lot of people brag about this bill. Really happy about the Green New Deal. I don't know if many of you read the Chinese paper. They're happier. Because that's where you're sending the hard-earned working taxpayers of Americans. And if you don't get enough, the IRS agents are going to pound on their door. Meanwhile, President Biden is acting like there's no competition at all. To name a few important issues Biden has folded on, he bailed out Huawei and refuses to investigate the origins of coronavirus or hold China accountable for its action. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you another story. This is a personal story with your leadership and ours. Many of us had the pleasure and the honor of going to the 75th anniversary of D-Day. I think every American should go. Read the headstones. The ages. The thousands upon thousands of America who all died in a short time frame. You look at the stars of David and the crosses. And I traveled with our speaker, Nancy Pelosi. And as we flew in a helicopter and we went down the path with the doors open, you wonder about those brave men. You still saw the guns of the Germans. They had to land and they were shooting ducks. And they had to climb up and they were just being shot one after the other. So young. But their children's are proud of them. And when I looked at those headstones, I looked at the speaker and I wondered, what could America have done before then that would not have lost their lives? What could we have done before the rise of Hitler or Mussolini? Where could we have made that investment? Then I thought to the future as us as policymakers. History repeats itself. I watch China steal our technology. I watch them test hypersonics. I watch them build a new coal plant and shut us down. This isn't like the Soviet Union. We're not going to outspend them. And I asked the speaker, could we create a committee? Equal number of Republicans, equal number of Democrats, to just focus on China. She thought it was an interesting idea. I called Steny, the majority leader. I've had the same idea to him. I spent 8 months on this. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? They agreed. We agreed. We picked the number of members. And then they came back to me and said, no, we had to shrink it. That's okay, that's okay. I just really want to have this happen. Because you know, Xi Jinping isn't going to abide by the term limits. He tries to wait everybody out, Mr. Speaker. We got so close, we invited the Washington Post reporter in to interview the members who are going to be on this committee. They pre-interviewed it so we would be able to introduce it. The night before, that moment, like the time in the boat, I was proud of Congress. We're going to do this together in one of our greatest challenges. I got a phone call. So we're not doing the committee. So what are you talking about? You spent 8 months at this. You see, COVID had hit. And they thought it might give a political advantage. We focused on China. I went ahead anyways and chart the China task force. And in that China task force, all the ideas that came up with, 2/3 of them were bipartisan. Mr. Speaker, we talk a lot about the future. If this body changes power, we will have a committee that focuses on the future of America and China. We need to plan. This is going to do a lot of damage to us. I'm hoping 5 of you change your mind. And you know what? I'm going to welcome you to serve on it too. I want one American policy. I don't want to look out in California and see all those ships anymore. I want to look at California and see all those ships leaving with American product going to other countries. We need to hold them accountable. Why would the world stay silent after the millions upon millions who have died from COVID? Would it not raise a question if China shut down their domestic flights but kept their international open? Welcome, Madam Speaker. I'm just getting geared up. Good, you sit. Now, Republicans are offering a better approach. Instead of cooperating with China from a position of weakness, we need to compete from a position of strength. Madam Speaker, you're new and I'm not sure you've been listening. I hope you were. I would think, Madam Speaker, why don't we have a full Congress briefing on China's hypersonics? Why don't we do one thing? Why don't we pause this bill? If this bill is going to spend $5 trillion, more than any other bill we've ever spent, more than what we spent to win World War II, why don't we pause this bill, have a briefing of all of us together about that Sputnik moment that our top military tells us? And why don't we rise to the occasion? Why don't we do what America did at that moment? Where their children witness one Germany. Why don't we pause? And let's see if we ought to spend the money there. You see, with one-party rule, the last time you had it, you cut the funding for hypersonics. Now, I don't remember the debate, and I don't know, Madam Speaker, if somebody on the other side said by this cut our children's children will be excited about this night. But I do know where we stand today, more than 12 years later, in a weaker position, more dependent, and more vulnerable. You know what that means if we want to do something different? That means strengthening our military, rebuilding our economy, and regaining our position of leadership in the world. I don't know how many historians, but if you study the entire world, there's only been two nations that's had the largest economy: China and America. You know, in the last year, ours grew faster than them. They were catching us. After this bill, you put a weight belt on us. You gave an advantage to them. What if we did this too? What if we paused? And what if we together inspired the rest of the nations in the world and said, let's not reward China with the Olympics? Do you want to reward them? I'll guarantee you their economy will be stronger after this bill. We can't keep being nice. We can't let them continue to lie, to steal. It also means delivering truth and accountability when it comes to the coronavirus. There's not one in this chamber that does not know somebody who died from COVID. I was talking to a friend last night. He's about my age, but he had these two mentors. They're older men. They're farmers. He's a farmer. And he'd been calling them. He was down looking at them. Couldn't find them. Never heard this friend of mine get emotional. He said he just got a call back. One of them died from COVID. His father's no longer alive, but he felt he lost his father that night. You know who he's most mad at? China. I never heard him cuss until that night. He just felt it was so unfair. Don't we all? Don't we remember being in these chambers, struggling in our own community, trying to find PPE just for our hospitals? You know, some of the brightest moments of America happened at that. We watch people risk their lives. But we watch what America does best: ingenuity, invest. We don't have one vaccine, we have 3. You ask anybody in the world, do they want a vaccine from Russia, China? They want America's. We did that. We did it faster than Fauci ever said we could. You know what else we could do? We could do hypersonics too. We're not going to gain on China if they tested it 200 times and we're at 9. Madam Speaker, hypersonics is a first strike weapon. Look, I was a smart aleck growing up, and I got in a few fights. But the one thing I would tell you in a schoolyard, I never won one that someone got to punch me 5 times before I could swing. But that's what your children are going to learn tonight. They could strike us before we could defend us. Are we weaker based upon what happened in Afghanistan? Oh, yes, we are. If you don't read China's papers, you know what they told Taiwan the next day? See, America won't be there for you. I'm speaking soft, Madam Speaker, but I wasn't imitating President Biden. I imagine the papers in China will read soon after this bill passes that America is going to ask them, the Chinese, to buy our bonds so they have greater control over us. That America is going to be weaker. That they did nothing to stop the flow of fentanyl made in China coming to America. We cannot lose sight of the ultimate goal. We will not allow America to fall further behind like the Biden administration has. Madam Speaker, when they study history, our children's children, I'm sure the chapter will read one-party control for one term. The damage that was done. There'll be college courses. There'll be people who are nominated to the Fed simply because they just studied that inflation that came back today. I don't know about you, but if you study history, there's no easy way getting out of inflation. There's only pain. Don't take my word for it. Just pick up the Wall Street Journal and read the story of Turkey today. Madam Speaker, I know my friend, Mr. Neal, has been here 33 years. He's got to remember what inflation looked like in the 70s. Interest rates in double digits. But Madam Speaker, it's different today. You see, for all those Democrats, Madam Speaker, that would not vote for the bill unless they got the CBO report that told them it paid for itself. I watched some of them on TV. I feel sorry for them. I don't know how they face their constituents again. Or what about those 21 members, Madam Speaker, in your conference that sent a letter to the Speaker that said, take out the IRS agents? I guess if you send a letter, it's okay to vote the opposite. I don't know. Where I grow up, in my family, that's not what we were taught. CBO came back. In 5 years, it cost $800 billion. And that's after you played all the tricks of all the dials where you don't pay for everything. You see the difference today. Our debt is larger than our GDP. You see, when that happened before, we weren't fighting for a Green New Deal. We were fighting to save America and the world. And the minute World War II was over, it dropped. Madam Speaker, I think you're fighting to make this country a socialist country. Margaret Thatcher said it well. You're going to run out of everybody else's money. The difference now, though, you've got inflation. And what's so sad is, you were warned that would happen. And I know you don't want to listen to me. I know you don't like me. That's okay. But Larry Summers worked in 2 Democrat administrations. He serves in most one of the prestigious universities in America. He is partisan, but he's an economist. And before you pass that $2 trillion, and remember what happened, it's similar to this bill. It's not bipartisan. And what's so unusual, when COVID hit, all those bills we did it. But when January 20th hit, when it was one-party rule, all changed. We were no longer welcome. So we warned you, but you may have thought it was politics. But then Larry Summers warned you in February. You passed it anyways. 9% went to COVID. The school money, a lot of it didn't last to 2-3 years later. Then we read all about these schools. They had too much money. They're giving bonuses if people don't even work. On January 20th, you passed rules that said bills didn't have to go through committee. You made proxy voting. I remember in the negotiation on proxy. I remember, Madam Speaker, talking to the Speaker and the Majority Leader at the very beginning. They said, we'll never do proxy. It'll destroy the body of Congress. Historians will tell you that. Even when the Confederacy wasn't that far away, we still met. August 24th, It was 1814, 1816. When the British burned this building down, we still met. Through every pandemic, we still met. But what we thought, and I disagreed, it's only those few people who has respiratory problems. We're going to make it tough. Only a few people are going to do it for a short time. And they're going to sign a letter that said they just can't make it there. Madam Speaker, I was shocked when I saw a member on your side of the aisle. He must have been really fearful of COVID because he was on a boat. Looked like a vacation to me. Madam Speaker, today I got my booster shot, my third shot. I've had COVID. I've had 3 shots. I went down to see Dr. Monahan. I said, would I have any side effects? You see, I got my second shot the morning of January 6th. And I got the chills, I got the shakes that day for a lot of reasons. And I wondered if it was the best idea to get that shot today. I took it anyways. I don't know if I was going to be too tired. I might have a little headache now. But this is too important. This is just too important. This is a turning point in our country. We are at a tipping point. Because let me tell you what happens. You cannot curb inflation without devaluing the dollar or raising the interest rate. We raised it high after the last time the Democrats had one party, one control in the late 70s. But you know what? It'll cut all the economy, but we won't be able to pay our bills. We have too big a debt now. You know, Wharton School is an amazing school. They'd never accept me. They studied this bill. You didn't have to wait to the CBO. You know it costs $4 trillion. It also tells you it's going to lower our growth. Only 2 countries in the world have had the largest economy. If our currency is not the world currency, if our debt is too big, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, what the majority leader said to start this out, our children's children will remember this night. Oh, they will remember this night. We are a great nation. We are exceptional. This body has risen to so many occasions. But in the occasions they rose before, they didn't do it with one party. If America asked me what went wrong, one party rule for one term. Divided government makes you have to find compromise. Madam Speaker, when I came to this body, I came in a time of 2006. Republicans lost the majority for a lot of different reasons. There was only 13 Republicans, the smallest freshman class since 1914, and that's when they enlarged this body. And I've made friends on both sides of the aisle. I believe in competition. I believe in debate, but I believe in respect. 4 years later, there was a big night in Virginia and New Jersey. You see, if you study history, Virginia and New Jersey are all off-election elections. You know, Madam Speaker, your party had power for a long time in Congress. for 40 years. And before 1994, there was an election in 93. And it was a shock in Virginia and New Jersey. And in 94, something unheard of happened. Republicans won the majority. I should have known in 2006 that was going to happen, because in 2005, there was an election in Virginia and New Jersey. Democrats won, and it flipped. In 2009, I was in my second term. I was a deputy whip. I remember certain moments. I didn't know Steny Hoyer at that moment. I respected him. I respected his years of service. I respected the leadership in which he portrayed. And I remember it like it was slow motion. It's back when you could speak in the well. President Obama had just become president. We invited him to our conference. He wanted to do a stimulus bill. And I was proud of our conference that day. President Obama treated us with respect. We even met in HC5, where you meet now. And we got up one by one. I remember Kevin Brady. And the president said, I want to hear your ideas. We didn't play political games. We gave him ideas. And to the respect of President Obama, you know what he said? You know, that's a good one. No, I'm not going to do that one. I like that. He said, we're going to work together. As he walked out, we thought we were going to work together that day. Henry Waxman was a chairman at the time. He dropped the stimulus bill as the president left us, saying he was going to work with us. I used to spend my time down on the floor. I thank you for being here. I know it's late.
So you've been listening in to Representative Kevin McCarthy, who has now been speaking on the floor for almost 3 hours. We're coming up on 10 o'clock here in Phoenix, Arizona, midnight out on the East Coast. Lots of those lawmakers probably wondering how long this is going to be going for. We don't know at this time. Could go all night. But we are getting a statement from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling this ongoing speech a, quote, temper tantrum, saying that he, quote, needs a reality check. So we've been on this, on his remarks on the floor for probably the whole time, 3 hours now. This is what we do here on Live Now from Fox. We show you these live events as they happen. This one just so happens to be on Capitol Hill. So we appreciate all of the viewership. Anyone who is new, go check us out on Twitter at LiveNowFox. You can also head to our website, livenowfox.com, where you can watch us on any platform. We are expanding, and we're excited about it. And we're also excited about the rest of the evening here, as we're going to go back into those floor remarks with Representative McCarthy, but we're also going to break down some of the other top stories of the day. Some of you are going to be heading out to a 2-minute commercial break. Others of you back out to the House floor. Again, I'm Daytona Everett, here with Live Now from Fox. More to come.
It was popular. It's kind of like your COVID bill when it first passed. I looked at the polling today. This was early on in that majority. And I remembered the whole time what Steny Hoyer said. And right before that election, after Virginia, New Jersey, do you realize more people in America thought Elvis was alive than the stimulus created a job? If you look at your COVID bill, the $2 trillion, there's other moments I've had in here. You know, I came in, and one of the most moving votes we've ever had. I wasn't here to vote on whether we went to Iraq or Afghanistan. But I was here to vote about the surge. And I came in when we lost the majority, and a lot of that had to do with the continuing war. And I want to do something different. So I invited anybody that had an opinion, that was opposed, that was for it, from foreign ambassadors. And I remember the ambassadors telling us, we did not agree with you coming, but you better not leave it this way. And for anyone who serves in a body, and I served in the legislature before I came, nobody can prepare you for a vote like that. You know, when you take a vote like that, you're going to look a mother and a father, or a husband or a wife, in the eye, and you're going to have to explain why their loved one gave their life. So I did not want the administration to tell me anything. I was going to come to this conclusion because I had to make the decision myself. I had to look people in the eye. I voted for the surge that night. It was packed. One of the first times I spoke on the floor. I remember calling home. I was nervous. That April, I went to Iraq, Afghanistan. A group of us, bipartisan, we spent Christmas morning with General Petraeus in one of the little amazing houses in there. And I remember that was bipartisan. I remember respecting the other side. I remember America coming together. It was tough. You had just won the majority. The debate was about war. Men and women were losing their lives. But we didn't think America should leave that way. There were people on both sides of the aisle. You were in the majority. President Bush was still president. And we came to what was best for the future together. And then I remember the financial collapse. I remember being on this floor with TARP. For any of you that were here, it was all packed. Do you remember the chant? 100, 200, 300, 400. The Dow Jones going down. The Dow Jones, I think, went past 1,000. And ever since my days as deputy whip, I have this philosophy. The first 1 to 200 wins on any big bill. Now that proxy's here, it doesn't work. But for those who are voting in here, if you get to 200, first, that's usually where it's going to go. At that moment, more than 1,000 down. The no's were at 200. And it collapsed, and the market went up a little more, only down maybe 800. Do you remember how big that was? The world's largest economy on a financial meltdown that we both came together? Because it was a big vote, right? Do you know how much we spent then? $800 billion. $800 billion. You're spending $5 trillion while we have inflation. $800 billion was enough to save the financial markets of America. We got 10 million jobs out there for people to work on. You're doing nothing for the border, nothing for the children's future when it comes to China. No incentive to go to work. You're incentivizing people to come here illegally. You're incentivizing people to stay home and get a check. I like to study history. Every great society that have overextended themselves has collapsed. Madam Speaker, I don't mean to go back to what my friend Steny Hoyer said, but tonight will be the night that our children's children, oh, I apologize, I didn't see you back in the chair, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I ask you a question? Did you get to take a bathroom break? And I didn't, but I understand, that's okay. Tonight will be the night of that tipping point. Tonight will be the night. Have you looked at the market? Have you looked at the numbers that just came back this week on retails? You know what happens? Please talk to economists. If you supply all this money in a tight economy, you're going to create more inflation. Mr. Speaker, when I served at that time, 4 years later, we became the majority. I had the honor of privilege, my conference, to elect me majority whip and majority leader. And I will know the frustration that I had when you would do your motions to recommit. But I never once said I wanted so much control to take that away from you. I respect that you run for this office. I respect that your constituents elect you. And what your constituents do is they lend you power. They lend you their voice. So their voice needs to be heard. When you shut out the minority, you're shutting out millions of Americans. Now, I don't know what the case was, but I remember talking to my freshman class in 2011, and I put up every 63 names of every Democrat that lost, Mr. Speaker, and I said they had two things in common. They all voted for a motion to recommit, and they all lost. In the 8 years that we were in the majority, we never lost one motion to recommit. Why would you change the course of the history of this body to take away the voice of the minority? You're not hurting me. You're hurting millions of Americans who participate in the electoral system. Is that about control? I know our tempers flare, but I promise you this, Mr. Speaker. I will never tell one of you can't look at me. Even if you're saying something bad about me. You have a right to do it. We're in America. I don't want control over you. I want to participate with you. I want to work with you. I want to solve problems with you. You know, people ask me, what has gone wrong? And I'll be honest with you. I spent a lot of time thinking about the next Congress. How do we heal this place? Mr. Speaker, if you're all thinking of running again, for those who win, no more proxy voting. You're going to have to show up to work. Mr. Speaker, America is more than a country. We're an idea. Every single one here, except a few that are Native American, came as immigrants. I've told you about the paintings in my office. I also have the papers of Ellis Island, of my grandfather. 100 years ago this year, came at the age of 10 from Italy. Giuseppe Palladino. He dreamt of a new world. He knew America would be better with each generation. He came like many of your ancestors. Some of the greatest strength in this country is the rule of law. Even in the financial meltdown, people still invested in America. So many times when I was in graduate school, I would do a SWOT analysis. Strength, weakness, opportunities, threats. You start with your strengths to see if they're big enough to overcome your weaknesses. Are there opportunities big enough to overcome the future threats? We are still the largest economy in this world. But it won't stay if this passes. We have the greatest fighting force that volunteers. If you are wealthy and you live in another country and you're sick, you still want to come here for your health care. You still want to send your kids here to go to school. They admire who we are and what we've been. I talk about what made me a Republican. I was in the 6th grade. I turn on the TV. I watch Jimmy Carter have a sweater on and tell me to turn the heater down, that the best days were behind us. That as an American, I had to accept less. That wasn't how I was raised. Then I watched this other man, Mr. Speaker, that came from our home state of California. He went to the podium. He said, no pastels. Fly that bold color and go to that shiny city on the hill. I knew what he meant when he talked about that shiny city. That was America. That was more than a country. That was an idea of freedom. Going away from oppression. It went beyond Maine, beyond California. I know you all believe that's America. But under one party rule, under 1 year, that light has been dimmed. Our task should be joined together, climb that mountain, recharge that light. 5 of you should rise up, put the country first, and say no. 21 of you signed a letter that said take the 87 IRS agents out of the bill. It's still in it. Does your name matter?
Okay, Kevin McCarthy, House Minority Leader there on the House floor, going for well over 3 hours now, speaking and railing against the Build Back Better Act. Not only that, many, many different topics that Republicans are not in favor of, that they are opposed to, and he's very adamant, vehement, fiery there with some of his colleagues behind him. And it still remains to be seen how long he is going to go into the night. Remember, we were expecting a vote in the House on the Build Back Better Act tonight. But as leader, he is in the leadership. He gets as much time as he wants to say what he wants to say. And he's very, very animated. We've been watching for some time. He's been going on almost 3 hours, like I said, talking about the border, immigration, supply chain, inflation, gas prices, faults and mistakes that he thinks the Biden administration is making, saying that this much government spending will fundamentally change the way of life here, America. And so we're going to move on to some of these other headlines we just want to get to in our last hour of live coverage here on Live Now from Fox. We want to thank you for being with us. I'm Andrew Kraft. We're going to take just a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, we'll have an update on a tragic story out of Maryland, 4 dead in what was a kidnapping and then a apparent murder-suicide. We'll hear from the Maryland State Police in just a moment. Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. You're just taking a look at some video aerial pictures that we got today out of Smithsburg, Maryland. A tragic ending in the manhunt for the ex-Baltimore County police officer accused of kidnapping his two daughters in Pennsylvania. Robert Vicosa, his two children, and Tia Bynum, a Baltimore County police sergeant who is currently suspended, were all found dead, and that is now being confirmed, their identities, by the Maryland State Police, identifying those deceased individuals located inside a gray Ford Edge after an apparent murder-suicide today in Washington County, Maryland. Police identified the woman in the front seat of the vehicle as Tia Bynum. She's 35 years old, of Baltimore. She was pronounced dead on the scene by emergency medical service personnel. She was wanted by the Baltimore County Police Department and was considered armed and dangerous. Also, the deceased man located in the back seat of the vehicle is identified as Robert Vicosa, 41 years of age. He was pronounced dead on scene by emergency medical service personnel. He was also a wanted fugitive for committing multiple felony crimes in both Pennsylvania and in Maryland. You can see this was the scene this afternoon. Police believe the two juveniles located in the back seat were Vicosa's children. One was pronounced dead at the scene, and the other was transported by Maryland State Police to Meritus Medical Center in Hagerstown, and she was pronounced deceased. That was our reporter on the scene from earlier. And you can see some of the other video of the scene there. Shortly before 2:30 this afternoon, Pennsylvania State Police alerted the Maryland State Police that they located a car matching the description of the suspect vehicle involved, including child abduction and carjacking. With emergency equipment activated, the Pennsylvania State Police attempted to initiate a traffic stop on the vehicle. Shortly thereafter, the vehicle veered off the road, struck a culvert, and came to rest in a grassy area. Maryland State Police were also on the scene within seconds of the vehicle stopping. After several efforts were made to make contact with the occupants, troopers from the Special Tactical Assault Team element attempted to gain access to the vehicle. With limited visibility due to window tinting and interior fogging, police utilized two 40mm sponge rounds to break the front passenger side window, knowing the front passenger seat was unoccupied. At that point, troopers could see the driver was incapacitated with apparent gunshot wounds. Troopers took immediate action to get further inside the vehicle to check the welfare of the children in the back seat. All four individuals appeared to have suffered apparent gunshot wounds. There is no motive known at this time. Investigators on the scene located an assault rifle and other firearms inside the vehicle. We wanted to just give you an update on a very, very tragic story there on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. We heard from Maryland State Police officials also today. We just want to show you that press conference from earlier.
Hello, I am Elena Russo, Public Information Officer for the Maryland State Police. Before we begin, let me stress that all information we're about to discuss is preliminary and it is subject to change. This is an ongoing investigation. Again, everything is preliminary and subject to change. The Maryland State Police were contacted by the Pennsylvania State Police when they were attempting a traffic stop on a car that matched the description of a suspect vehicle involved in an incident in Baltimore County. The Maryland State Police were given the location of this vehicle, which was approaching the Maryland line. That was heading south towards Waynesboro, Pennsylvania on Ringgold Pike in Smithsburg, Maryland. Shortly after crossing into Maryland, the vehicle traveled off of the highway and struck a fence line. Police surrounded the vehicle, attempting to make contact with the occupants. At approximately 2:30 p.m., our crisis negotiation team on scene made several attempts to contact the occupants of the vehicle. After receiving no response and low visibility within the vehicle because of a thick layer of smoke that was contained within the interior of the vehicle, police made entry into the passenger side. That is when they observed the driver and 3 backseat passengers, 2 of which were juveniles. All 4 individuals appeared to have suffered apparent gunshot wounds. 3 people were pronounced deceased on the scene, including the female driver, an adult male, and 1 juvenile, both of which were backseat passengers. The 3rd backseat passenger, a juvenile, was medevaced to Meritus Medical Center in Hagerstown, where she was pronounced deceased. Identification of all 4 individuals is pending next of kin notification. Based on the vehicle involved in the short pursuit in Pennsylvania and the circumstances surrounding this incident, police believe they know who the individuals are. However, because it is still an active crime scene investigation, we cannot release the identity of the occupants of the vehicle. Investigators do believe this incident is potentially related to 2 other incidents, one in Maryland and one in Pennsylvania. This is a complex incident, is going to take time. Our investigators are on the scene now, and again, it is an active crime scene. We are really working hard to understand what occurred, and we hope to have our next briefing as a news release that I will get out to you hopefully this evening with more information.
Elena, will you tell us how everybody died and what kind of weapon was used and who it belonged to?
At this point, all I can confirm is that all 4 individuals inside that vehicle appear to have suffered apparent gunshot wounds.
Multiple?
I can't tell you how many. I can just tell you that appeared to suffer gunshot wounds.
Did officers fire any shots in this matter?
Still under investigation. Again, it's still unfolding as we speak. It is an active crime scene.
You cannot say whether it's connected to the kidnapping from 2 ex-Baltimore gunshots.
Police believe this incident may be related to 2 other incidents, one in Maryland and one in Pennsylvania.
Did anyone make it out?
That's part of the investigation, sir.
Would you go over once again, just for clarity, officers try to make a traffic stop, and then what happened?
The Pennsylvania State Police were attempting a traffic stop on a car that matched the description of a suspect vehicle involved in an incident in Baltimore County. The vehicle had been approaching the Maryland line, heading south on Ringgold Pike in Smithsburg towards Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. The Maryland State Police were waiting on the other end.
What happened to the vehicle?
I believe it's still at the crime scene.
No, I mean the vehicle crashed and ran off the road.
The vehicle ran off the road and hit a fence line.
Do you believe the victims inside were the gunshot wounds during this interaction with police, or were they already deceased inside?
Still part of the active investigation. There's so much to this investigation that I can't give any confirmed details at this point, except for what I was able to provide. Thank you.
How long was the pursuit?
Okay, so we just wanted to show you that press conference, very, very brief. And now we do know, though, that they have identified the 4 individuals, the 2 adults and the 2 children who were deceased in this apparent murder-suicide today, this afternoon. So we wanted to bring you updates on that story. I'm Andrew Kraft. We want to thank you for being with us here on this Thursday night. We want to just hit some more of these headlines. We're going to hear from a member of the FBI. They were announcing today that 2 Iranian nationals have been charged for cyber-enabled disinformation and threat campaign designed to influence the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Here's an FBI official announcing those arrests today.
22nd, 2020, FBI and CISA publicly announced the Iranian campaign to intimidate and influence American voters and otherwise undermine voter confidence and create discord in the 2020 U.S. election process. This attack on our democracy will not be tolerated. Today, the Department of Justice is announcing grand jury indictments of 2 Iranian nationals for their alleged participation in a multifaceted campaign aimed at influencing and interfering with the United States 2020 presidential election. We thank the Department of Treasury for their role in sanctioning 6 Iranian nationals and eminent Pasargad, and Department of State and all of our partners who stop at nothing to hold malicious cyber actors accountable.
Okay, that was from the FBI Cyber Division. They posted that video on their Twitter account today. Just want to go into some of the details in this indictment, in this charging document today that the Department of Justice put out. They say, as alleged, the two Iranian nationals were part of a coordinated conspiracy in which Iranian hackers sought to undermine faith and confidence in the U.S. presidential election. They accessed voter information from at least one state's voter database. They threatened U.S. voters via email and even disseminated a fictitious video that purported to depict actors fabricating overseas ballots. The U.S. will never tolerate any foreign actors' attempts to undermine our free and democratic elections. As a result of the charges unsealed today and the concurrent efforts of our U.S. government partners, both of the Iranian nationals will forever look over their shoulders as we strive to bring them to justice. Now, of course, it remains to be seen on if they can apprehend these two Iranian nationals to bring them here to face the charges and to face a trial and sentencing. But major development there on the FBI Cyber Division with this these arrests and these charges announced today. We're going to be moving on to some of the other headlines. We want to bring it back stateside because, remember, we brought you those videos outside the Oklahoma executive residence of Governor Kevin Stitt just last night. Members of Julius Jones's family and friends and activists pleading for the governor to intervene in his execution, which was scheduled today. Well, in fact, that did happen. Governor Stitt commuted the execution. I just want to put up his statement from his Twitter account today. You can see, I'm going to read this in part. It goes on to say, after prayerful consideration and reviewing materials presented by all sides of this case, I've determined to commute Julius Jones's sentence to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So, commuting that sentence, bringing it down from the death sentence to a life imprisonment without the probability or possibility of parole. Now, this is significant. We showed you all of those protests outside the Oklahoma governor's executive residence. Last night, we showed you Julius Jones's mother, but they were quite jubilant today at the Oklahoma State House. I just want to play some of this video from earlier. And, of course, the headline in all of this, the Oklahoma governor commuting the death sentence of Julius Jones, who is sentenced to be executed today. People embraced and cheered outside the Oklahoma State Penitentiary after learning about the commutation. Julius Jones had been found guilty of the 1999 shooting death of another man. He spent close to 20 years on death row. The governor commuted Jones's sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jones and his supporters say he's innocent. The case drew the attention of celebrities, including the actress Viola Davis, who produced a 3-part documentary on the case of Julius Jones. He was convicted and sentenced in the 1999 murder of an Oklahoma City businessman. And there you can see so many of his supporters there, jubilant at this news today. We're going to take a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be telling you the story of yet another exoneration today in the state of New York into who killed Malcolm X. 2 assailants who were thought to be the killers exonerated today by a New York judge. We'll have that story in just a moment. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox on this Thursday night. I'm Andrew Kraft. We want to thank you for watching. We do want to just give you an update. Let's go back out to the House floor. Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader there, still going after almost now 4 hours. There he is. We are now learning, though, that Democrats are expected to adjourn the House session and hold the vote on the Build Back Better Act tomorrow as McCarthy's speech continues there on the floor. It's almost 12:30 in the morning there. And so it looks like he's not letting up. He's still going. We're going to be showing you some more of those remarks, but we do want to take the opportunity to tell you another story. This happening in New York today. A New York judge exonerating 2 out of the 3 men convicted of killing civil rights icon Malcolm X. This is a huge, huge story. You can see this photo right there of one of these assailants. A judge dismissing the convictions against Muhammad Aziz and the late Khalil Islam. Both were sentenced to life in prison in 1966 for the shooting death of Malcolm X in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom. Aziz was released on parole in 1985 and Islam 2 years later. Both maintained they were innocent and that they were set up. Today, prosecutors apologized to both men, saying new evidence shows they were not involved in the murder at all. Instead, evidence shows authorities withheld information during the initial investigation that would have cleared their names. Fox 5 in New York takes a closer look at this story.
The joint motion is hereby granted. And the record.
And with that, Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam's convictions in the assassination of Malcolm X are no more. The 83-year-old Aziz addressing the court 55 years after his wrongful conviction.
I hope the same system that was responsible for this travesty of justice also takes responsibility for the immeasurable harm caused to me.
Khalil Islam died in 2009, but his family was in the courtroom to witness his exoneration.
It's a good thing that happened, but it's not, it doesn't replace everything that we lost.
Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance Jr. formally moving to throw out Aziz and Islam's 1966 convictions, apologizing for his office's role in the decades-long miscarriage of justice. The DA concluded the jury would have acquitted Aziz and Islam had it been aware of exculpatory evidence the FBI and NYPD deliberately failed to provide to the defense at trial.
It is clear these men did not receive a fair trial, and in our opinion, their convictions must be vacated.
Vance's office revisited Aziz and Islam's case nearly 2 years ago after Netflix aired activist and investigative journalist Abdur Rahman Muhammad's documentary series, Who Killed Malcolm X. And now, more than 3 decades after the 2 men were paroled from their life sentences, Aziz says their experiences remain relevant today.
The events that brought us to court today should never have occurred. Those events were and are the result of a process that was corrupt to its core. One that was all too familiar to black people in 2021.
It's worth noting that the DA's investigation was limited only to convictions of Aziz and Islam. It left unanswered other long-standing questions like what role, if any, the FBI, the NYPD, or the Nation of Islam's leadership had in Malcolm X's assassination. I'm reporting outside the criminal court in Lower Manhattan. Mike Sachs, Fox 5 News.
Mike, thanks for that story. Really, really stunning there. In court, you heard Aziz told the judge his conviction should never have happened. He hopes that the justice system will now take full responsibility for the harm it caused him for more than 5 decades. Islam died in 2009, and outside court, his sons also saying that the exoneration does not make up for the decades of pain that their family suffered. As for who killed Malcolm X back in February of 1965, both the NYPD and the FBI say they're committed to cooperating with the reinvestigation of what happened. Let's hear from some of those stakeholders outside the court in New York from earlier this morning.
Just tell us what you thought listening to the hearing today, the fact that your father isn't here to experience all of this.
Exactly. The fact that he's not here, it brings me a little satisfaction because I was in my mother's belly when he was taken. So 25 years, there was no father-son connection except through, visitation rooms. So the fact that it almost sounds casual to me that he's being exonerated. So the great pleasure is not there because he's not here with me. So, and the fact that the family suffered growing up with concerns of fear, of people coming after us, or to, walking to school, looking over my shoulder, those kind of things you can't get back. So normality was gone when I was 10, because in 1975 we were forced to leave where we lived because it was assumed that someone was coming after us. So my childhood was over at the age of 10. So right now, this is great, but not so great at the same time. So I am happy, but there's still sadness, so that's how I feel.
What's next for you and your family?
We're not sure. We're talking to the attorneys, and we'll see what happens next.
What's your name, sir?
Shahid Johnson. Shahid Johnson.
Is it HID?
S-H-A-H-I-D.
And can you talk about some of the questions that remain about, for instance, how this evidence remained hidden for so long?
Well, all I did was read growing up. I was quite fascinated with the whole case, so I knew all the evidence growing up. Every year I just read more books, and if I was able to discover the truth, I couldn't understand why nobody else could. And I was a kid. All I did was read the books that was left in my house, so I'm confused. Say it again?
Did your father ever think he'd be cleared that this day would come?
I don't know, because when we spoke, we would speak of other things. He was at a point where he looked towards his spirituality to keep him, whole. So it wasn't about the type of things that most people would be thinking about. It was just about him being okay and being normal. So that was his focus.
Do you think there's a connection between police brutality today and this?
Well, there's definitely a lack of concern for certain members of the community. So, that's evident because the evidence speaks for itself. And I don't think many of those things are ever resolved because we wouldn't take 50-something years to have exoneration.
The judge and the prosecutor apologized to your family. Is that apology enough?
It's hard. No, it's really not. It's too much. It's too much discomfort, sadness. Imagine growing up worrying about this every single day of your life. As a kid, you're in the classroom, you're looking out the window, and you're not wondering about what's being taught in class. You're worrying about what's going on in the world. So no, it's a lot.
Do you think your family, you say you guys are doing as well as Mr. Z's for financial compensation for all the wrongs?
That's something that we definitely would look into. Like I said, it's not going to bring my father back. I lost my mother. My mother passed away, almost 20 years ago, and she suffered, through the whole thing. I watched her handle her motherly responsibilities by herself, and it was trying. She had lupus. Right, she had lupus, and she struggled. She struggled with sickness. She had to take care of us. She had to worry about us, scared to death every day we left the house. So it was a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot for an exoneration just to take away everything.
Does it feel a little unreal to you that this day has finally come?
Exactly. It's like it's going to take me a week to process this. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in.
What did your father say about Malcolm?
We didn't talk too much about Malcolm X. My time spent with him was trying to get to know him. So we didn't talk about the case too much, and he felt he didn't really want to talk about it because maybe he was so disappointed the way things went. So maybe he preferred not to talk about it.
Today we heard for the first time that J. Edgar Hoover, the this information that is now exonerating your father posthumously. Can you tell me how it feels to know that someone in the American government that high up, that close to the president, was invested in this outcome that branded your father a killer forever for the rest of his life?
Well, you know what? I was fortunate because my father left a lot of books in the house. So I was able to read a lot, and I was able to understand that. I had a full understanding of that system, and it's not surprising. I've always been upset. That I would never stop being upset about what happened because all of that affected me. So I would never stop being upset about that. I was in my mother's belly. So that's why I wasn't born yet. You know, my brother, he was 1 year old. You know, so we both grew up together, looking over each other's backs, worrying about, you know, is someone coming to get us.
Was your mother actually pregnant with you at the time?
Yes. Yes.
Can you stand over there with you so we get a photograph?
I mean, can you come over?
Sir, how are you doing?
Bittersweet, emotions running everywhere. The fact that my father and my mother weren't here, are not here alive to see this and to experience the exoneration is painful because they suffered a lot. They suffered a lot. I believe that their deaths was a direct result of the stress and drama and trauma and post-traumatic stress that this whole situation has caused on them. So I can't say that I'm completely happy because they're not here, and I think that the effects of it removed them from our lives. So
I would definitely agree.
And just to recap there, we wanted to show you some of those remarks from the sons of Khalil Islam, their father no longer alive, but a judge today exonerating he and Muhammad Aziz, two men convicted of killing civil rights icon Malcolm X. Evidence, though, showing authorities withheld information during that initial investigation that would have cleared their names, exculpatory information. Prosecutors apologized to both of the men, saying that those new evidence shows that they were not involved in the murder of Malcolm X. Remember the turbulent 1960s that saw the assassination of not only Martin Luther King Jr., but Malcolm X, as well as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And so that decade was one for the history books, very, very turbulent there. And so hopefully that those family members have some peace of mind knowing this today. We do want to just give you an update because Kevin McCarthy is still speaking there on the House floor. We are now learning that the speech has successfully delayed the House passage of the Build Back Better Act. So there will be no votes tonight in the House. We'll see if they vote on this tomorrow morning. Let's just listen in for a little bit more of Kevin McCarthy.
And at least that's what we were doing. And the results completely shifted the energy landscape in our favor. But it wasn't just energy. I don't believe we'd ever get the Abraham Accords if we weren't able to do that. The world became safer. The world is a safer place when America is stronger. The only thing you have to look to in history is why does Putin have all those troops along the border? Why does China say they could take Taiwan? One-party rule in 1 year. That's what it's accomplished. Just a few years ago, the United States, while it was lowering CO2, produced more oil and gas than any other country in the world. And guess what? Our gasoline prices reflected it. So not only did it help business produce more and hire more, the energy industry was hiring more people at a high wage. More people working. You watch that every day in your district. But you also watch what happened. Mr. Speaker, I'm referring to Kevin Brady. What happened to Houston after that pipeline was closed? You had to look them in their eye. You know the sad part about all of this? I remember speaking to this man who worked on the pipeline. He wasn't of the Republican Party. He was.
Okay, so it's going on almost 1 a.m. there in Washington, D.C. on the House floor. The minority leader speaking for almost 4 hours now. It remains to be seen how long he will go. And of course, this has delayed the Build Back Better Act vote tonight in the House. No doubt, a very successful maneuver by the Republican minority leader to delay the vote. I'm Andrew Kraft. I want to thank you for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. Don't forget, just want to give you a sense of some of the stories we're going to be following tomorrow to cap off the week. Of course, the jury there in Kenosha will be deliberating for a 4th day into the fate of Kyle Rittenhouse. What will they decide? We'll have live proceedings as we have been tomorrow. Also, we'll be following all the latest developments in the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial there down in Brunswick, Georgia. We'll have more reporters there as well and events about that trial. Also, we're expecting and anticipating a decision from the FDA advisory panel and the CDC tomorrow on full authorization for boosters for all adult Americans with both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for a lot of booster news tomorrow. So we're expecting that as well. Of course, we'll see what the president is up to today. He was meeting with his Canadian and Mexican counterparts, that North American summit, talking about their shared commitments, but also issues that they need to work through, including climate change, the economy, the supply chain, and migration and immigration. So we're going to be heading into some of these other events that we've already shown you throughout the day. Don't forget, give us a follow on Twitter. Our handle is at LiveNowFox. You can also give us a visit at our website, LiveNowFox.com. Right now, though, let's listen in to the White House Press Secretary, Jen Psaki, at the White House briefing. In case you might have missed it earlier, we're going to play it out in its entirety. But for all of us here at Live Now, we hope you have a great night. We'll see you same time, same place tomorrow.
For the middle class, speaking with members who represent the full spectrum of views of Hill Democrats about the pathway forward on both his human infrastructure and physical infrastructure plans. He spoke, as I think some of you reported, this morning with Representative Jayapal at the White House, and we'll have a number of additional conversations by phone with members of both chambers and who also run the gamut in terms of their views as we proceed through the course of the afternoon. Tomorrow, he will host 2 different meetings